somewhere between myth and memory, lies everything we forgot to remember. Scrolls turned to ash, statues swallowed by oceans, civilizations that rose like titans and vanished without a whisper. This isn't history. This is what history lost. The missing pieces, the silent pages, the treasures, languages, cities, and secrets that slipped through our fingers and into the abyss. From Cleopatra's missing tomb to the ancient code we still can't crack. From cities that defied time to books that time defied. These aren't just ruins, they're ghosts. And together, they form one of the strangest mysteries ever told, the most strangely lost history in the world. And if we can lose this much, what else have we already forgotten? Before we dive into the ruins, quick question for the explorers out there: where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it as you hit play on this journey through the forgotten? If you love unraveling the mysteries history tried to bury, hit that subscribe button. It helps keep the torch lit and you won't want to miss what we dig up next. The Library of Alexandria's full contents. Imagine a place where the minds of the ancient world converged. A sanctum of scrolls, ink, and whispered wisdom. The year is somewhere around 300 BCE. You stand at the edge of the greatest intellectual wonder of antiquity, where the air smells of papyrus and ambition. This is the Library of Alexandria, except you're not really standing there, because it's gone. Burned, sacked, lost, and the thing it held millions of words from forgotten geniuses, what makes it the greatest what-if in human history. You can almost hear it, the scratching of quills on parchment, the murmur of scholars in Greek, Egyptian, Persian, maybe even Sanskrit, a fevered murmur of minds competing to trap lightning in symbols. It's said the library once held 400,000 scrolls. Others say 700,000. The numbers are blurry. But one thing's clear. Humanity stacked centuries of knowledge into one building and then watched it vanish. Let's rewind. The library was founded under the rule of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's successors. The goal wasn't just to collect books, it was to collect all books. Every scrap of text from every corner of the known world. That meant diplomatic missions weren't just about politics, they were about plundering literature. Ships that docked in Alexandria had their books seized and copied. Originals stayed in the library, copies went back. Sorry, travelers, your cargo just joined eternity. And it wasn't just a warehouse, it was a machine. Scholars like Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference with jaw-dropping accuracy, or Hipparchus, who built the foundations of trigonometry, worked here. Herophilos dissected cadavers and dared to say the brain, not the heart, ruled the body. Think of the minds that thrived there, and think of the minds we'll never know, because their works were shelved, burned, or erased. There's no single villain in this story, no dramatic blaze with a timestamp. Instead, the destruction of the library was death by 1,000 cuts. Julius Caesar might have started the fire during his siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE. Later, Christian zeal in the 4th century and Muslim conquest in the 7th century finished the job. Each time, scrolls were lost. Each time, centuries of thought went up in smoke. Picture it. Shelves collapsing in firelight, cinders dancing through marble halls, monks and soldiers walking away, oblivious to what they've ended. The scroll that held the lost comedy of Aristophanes. The one that outlined a proto-heliocentric model centuries before Copernicus. The treatise that might have cured a medieval plague, gone before it had the chance to save a single life. We don't even know what we lost. That's the cosmic joke. Historians estimate that for every known classical author, there are 10 whose names we've never even heard. We only know they existed from citations ghosts quoted by other ghosts. There are hints, like rumors of a history of Babylon from Berossus, or a complete map of the known world by Agatharchides. But those hints are dead ends, fragments, puzzle pieces with no box art. Now imagine if it had survived. If Alexandria had never fallen, maybe the Renaissance would have started 1,000 years earlier. Maybe the Age of Enlightenment wouldn't have waited for Newton, because Democritus or Archimedes had already done the math. Maybe we would have landed on Mars by now, our suits stitched with the wisdom of Egyptian engineers and Chaldean astronomers. And let's talk poetry, the emotional loss. There were love letters from the Hellenistic age, plays that made people laugh in 200 BCE, the way you laugh at Netflix now. Philosophical dialogues that might have told us how to live better, die better, forgive better. How do you measure the value of a story untold? How do you grieve something that can't even be remembered? There's something absurdly human about it all. We built a temple to thought and lost it to chaos. We imagined a place where memory could be immortal and then forgot where we put it. The Library of Alexandria was not just a place. It was a promise. And the broken silence of its ash-covered ruins is a warning that knowledge is fragile, that curiosity has enemies. That fire is faster than ink. But this is only the beginning. Because if Alexandria was the greatest mine to vanish in smoke, what about the body that wore the crown? Let's talk about Cleopatra, the queen who may have walked those very halls. The one who seduced emperors, commanded fleets, and defied the world, and whose final resting place is still missing. You know what's more powerful than a lost library? A lost legend. And Cleopatra is both. Cleopatra's tomb. 2,000 years. That's how long the world has been looking for her. Cleopatra the Eightlist, Queen of Egypt, lover of Julius Caesar, soulmate of Mark Antony, goddess in human form, the original femme fatale. She ruled not with brute force, but with elegance, intellect, and the dangerous charisma of someone who knew exactly how history would remember her. And yet, for all the statues, all the plays, all the silver screen reincarnations, no one knows where she's buried. Which is ridiculous, because Cleopatra didn't just fade away. She didn't vanish in the fog of legend like King Arthur, or drift into abstraction like Gilgamesh. She was real, flesh and blood. Royal flesh, blue blood. She lived in palaces, commanded fleets, spoke 9 languages, and went out in one of the most dramatic suicides in world history. And she didn't die alonesh, died with Mark Antony in a final operatic act of defiance against Rome. According to Plutarch, they were buried together, somewhere near a temple to Isis, somewhere close to Alexandria. The tomb, he said, was lofty and beautiful. And yet, no one has found it. Not in 2 millennia of digging, not in centuries of conquest, not with satellites, sonar, or ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. It's a mystery buried under layers of history, sand, and salt water, because the Alexandria of Cleopatra's time isn't the same as the Alexandria of today. Much of the ancient city is underwater, swallowed by earthquakes and tsunamis that reconfigured the coast. The palace, where she lived, likely beneath the harbor. The temple to Isis, maybe collapsed, maybe submerged, maybe erased by Rome itself. That's the thing about empires. They don't just conquer, they overwrite. When Octavian, soon to be Augustus, marched into Alexandria in 30 BCE, he wasn't just claiming territory. He was burying an era. He took Cleopatra's children. He wiped out her legacy. He turned the Nile's most brilliant monarch into a cautionary tale for ambitious women. And the tomb? It disappears. Some believe it was destroyed. Others think it was deliberately hidden. There's a theory, romantic and cinematic, that Cleopatra wanted to vanish. That she chose to be buried in secrecy, wrapped in gold and myth, so her enemies could never claim her corpse. It's the last power move of a queen who always understood the value of spectacle. But the search goes on. One of the most prominent candidates for her burial site is the temple complex at Taposiris Magna, about 45 kilometers west of Alexandria. Archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has spent nearly 2 decades excavating it, believing it matches the descriptions. She's found tunnels, burial chambers, even coins and statues of Cleopatra. But no tomb. Not yet. The digs have revealed something else, though. Obsession. Martinez isn't the first to chase Cleopatra's ghost, and she won't be the last. Because Cleopatra isn't just a person, she's a symbol. A mystery wrapped in silk, soaked in perfume, hidden under centuries of male historians projecting whatever fantasy or fear they needed onto her. To Romans, she was a seductress. To Shakespeare, a tragic heroine. To Hollywood, Elizabeth Taylor in eyeliner. But to Egypt, she was the last true ruler. The end of a line that began with Alexander the Great. A woman who fought Rome to the bitter end, not with armies, but with identity. Greek by blood, Egyptian by choice. Cleopatra became Egypt. She wore it like armor. So what happens if we find the tomb? Let's suppose the limestone doors crack open tomorrow, that we descend into the cool, dark chamber where 2 sarcophagi rest side by side, that hieroglyphs whisper names we haven't read in 2,000 years, that the mummy still wears a diadem, that Antony and Cleopatra lie together, undisturbed since the moment she pressed the asp to her skin. It would be the greatest archaeological discovery of the 21st century. Bigger than Tutankhamun, bigger than the Rosetta Stone. Because this isn't just history, it's myth. Found, verified, humanized. And it would change everything we think we know. We might finally learn what she really looked like, not the Roman coins that make her look severe, or the busts that reflect more ideal than identity. The real Cleopatra. The face that captivated 2 of the most powerful men in history. The voice that commanded nations. Maybe there's jewelry. Maybe there are papyri letters, poems, decrees. Maybe she wrote her own epitaph, in a moment of theatrical brilliance, knowing full well she would be searched for, obsessed over centuries later. Or maybe we find nothing. Maybe her tomb lies crushed under the weight of Alexandria's ruins. Maybe her remains have long since returned to dust. Maybe the most powerful queen in history succeeded in her final act, becoming unsolvable. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some stories are meant to be unfinished. Cleopatra doesn't need a grave to be immortal. She is carved into the DNA of history itself, a ghost with a crown. But if her body was buried under stone and silence, there's another lost treasure that makes even her tomb look humble. A room, a single chamber, but one built like a jewel box, glowing with amber, glittering with gold. A room so stunning it became known as the 8th wonder of the world. It was stolen, hidden, and then vanished without a trace during the chaos of World War II, and it's never been seen again. Welcome to the hunt for the Amber Room. Before we unseal the next mystery, take a second, drop your city and your current time in the comments. It's wild seeing where and when history finds you. And if you're still with us on this journey through the world's strangest losses, make sure you're subscribed. One click keeps you connected to every forgotten corner we uncover. The Amber Room. It was once called the 8th wonder of the world, a chamber unlike anything else on Earth. Not because it held ancient secrets or sacred relics, but because it was built entirely out of light frozen in time. Imagine a room where the walls glow like fire, but not from any flame. Imagine walking into a box of sunbeam smolten gold, burnished honey, fossilized sunshine. This was the Amber Room. And like Cleopatra's tomb, it's missing, gone, swallowed by the 20th century's most chaotic war, leaving behind only whispers, replicas, and theories. Let's start at the beginning. The Amber Room wasn't ancient. It didn't belong to Rome or Egypt or Babylon. It was born in the 18th century, a marvel of Baroque design. It began in Prussia, around 1000, 701, under King Frederick I, designed by German sculptor Andreas Schluter and crafted by Danish amber artisan Gottfried Wolfram. But this wasn't just interior decoration. It was a statement piece for empires. A room of such overwhelming beauty that it didn't just decorate power, it defined it. When Russian Tsar Peter the Great visited Prussia, he saw the amber room and reportedly lost his breath. In 1716, it was gifted to him by King Frederick William I as a gesture of alliance. And thus, the amber room was shipped piece by glowing piece to St. Petersburg, then eventually installed in the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo. There, it grew into something even more elaborate. Russian craftsmen expanded and embellished it. Gold leaf, mirrors, mosaics. The room reached over 180 square feet, with over 6 tons of amber. 6 tons! That's not decor. That's alchemy. And for nearly 2 centuries it stood in Russia like a frozen sunset. It wasn't just beautiful, it was surreal. Amber is not a mineral, it's fossilized tree resin, organic, trapped air. Ancient insects caught in mid-flight. To step into the amber room was to step into time itself, into a memory older than kingdoms. But beauty, as ever, makes a tempting target. Enter World War II. In 1941, Operation Barbarossa began Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, and with it came a legion of art plunderers. Hitler, a failed artist turned fascist, had a known obsession with art, and the Nazis made looting part of their war machine. The Amber Room, glimmering in the halls of the Catherine Palace, was an obvious prize. The Soviets knew it was vulnerable. They tried to dismantle and hide it. But amber is fragile, it cracks, shatters. In desperation, they left it, covering the panels with wallpaper and hoping the Germans wouldn't notice. They noticed. In 1941, the German army captured Tsarskoye Selo. Specialists from the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, the Nazi art looting unit, dismantled the amber room in just 36 hours. Crated it, shipped it back to Königsberg, in East Prussia, now Kaliningrad, Russia. There, it was reassembled in the Königsberg Castle Museum. And then, poof. By 1945, Königsberg was under siege by the Red Army. Bombed, shelled, burned, the castle was heavily damaged, and the amber room, gone. What happened? That's the multi-million-dollar question. There are theories. Oh, so many theories. Theory 1. It was destroyed in the bombing. Easy answer. Königsberg Castle was hit hard. Fire could have reduced the amber to ash. But there's a problem. Amber doesn't burn cleanly. It leaves residue. There's no evidence it was incinerated on site. Theory 2. It was evacuated before the siege, shipped by train or truck to somewhere in Germany or even further, lost in transit, maybe buried in a salt mine, like so many other Nazi art treasures. Maybe sunk in the Baltic Sea aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff or another doomed ship torpedoed by Soviet submarines. Theory 3. It's still hidden, tucked away in a sealed bunker, a forgotten vault, a basement in a village no one's ever thought to check. The stuff of Indiana Jones plots, yes, but not entirely implausible. The Nazis had sprawling underground complexes, entire tunnel systems still being discovered. Over the decades, treasure hunters, historians, and conspiracy theorists have all joined the chase. People have died looking, literally. In 1987, a group searching in a Saxony cave died under suspicious circumstances, gas poisoning. Others have mysteriously disappeared or suffered sudden health issues. Some whisper curses. Others point to wartime cover-ups. What's fact is this. Despite international searches, despite entire foundations dedicated to it, no one has definitively found a single piece of the original amber room since the war. But here's the twist. It has been rebuilt. Sort of. In 2003, after more than 2 decades of work, a painstaking replica of the amber room was completed in the Catherine Palace, using old photographs and surviving fragments. Russian and German craftsmen, funded in part by German donations, resurrected it. Amber was hand-shaped, hand-polished, set into panels just as it was centuries ago. And it's beautiful, hauntingly so. But replicas don't erase mysteries, they highlight them. Because standing in the new amber room, you can't help but feel the ghost of the original. The glow is just a little too even. The finish a little too perfect. The legend is still missing. So why does it matter? Because the amber room is more than a missing artifact. It's a microcosm of 20th century history, created in peace, stolen in war, lost in chaos. It's a symbol of how beauty becomes a casualty, of how greed, ambition, and ideology consume art like they consume people. And it's a reminder that sometimes the world's greatest treasures don't vanish in ancient times. They vanish right in front of us, in the age of photography, bureaucracy, and supposedly civilized nations. 6 tons of amber, centuries of craftsmanship, erased in a moment. But the amber room isn't alone, because if it was a monument to opulence, the next mystery is a whisper of the divine. A thing we remember not for its weight, but for what it carried. The power of God, housed in wood and gold, lost in fire and fury. The original death mask of Tutankhamun. You've seen it, gleaming gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, quartz, the cobra and vulture atop the brow, the stoic serenity of the boy king who died too soon. Tutankhamun's death mask is arguably the most iconic artifact of ancient Egypt, the face of ancient mystery, the centerpiece of every textbook and museum banner since Howard Carter cracked open that tomb in 1922. But what if it's a lie? What if the most famous face in archaeology wasn't meant for Tutankhamun at all? Because here's the quiet, shimmering mystery that's been hiding in plain sight for over a century. Many Egyptologists believe the mask we call Tutankhamun's wasn't originally made for him. It may have been made for someone else. A woman, possibly his stepmother, possibly Nefertiti herself. And if that's true, then somewhere out there or buried in time lies the real death mask of King Tut. Let's back up. When Howard Carter pried open the doors to KV-62, the untouched tomb in the Valley of the King, she wasn't just opening a grave, he was unleashing a frenzy. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb electrified the world. Here was a pharaoh's burial, intact, glittering, cursed, according to some headlines, and seemingly frozen in time. Over 5,000 items filled the chambers: chariots, thrones, sandals, even containers of ancient food. But the jewel was the burial mask. Golden, lifelike, haunting, a pharaoh's face staring into eternity, and yet, the closer you look, the weirder it gets. First, the ears. The mask has pierced earlobes. That may seem minor until you realize adult male pharaohs weren't typically depicted with pierced ears, but royal women were. And child kings, like Tutankhamun, might have had them too. But he wasn't a child in death. He was 18 or 19. The pierced ears raise eyebrows. Then, the inscription. Along the back and shoulders of the mask, there's a hieroglyphic inscription identifying the wearer as Tutankhamun, beloved of Amun. But this inscription doesn't match the gold in the rest of the mask. In fact, modern analysis has shown that the face and the headdress may have been crafted separately and at different times. The gold composition of the face is different from that of the neck, as if someone took an older mask, altered the name, and reassembled it for Tut. Why would they do that? Tutankhamun came at the end of a religious revolution. His father, Akhenaten, had attempted to erase the traditional gods of Egypt in favor of the sun disk Aten. It was a theological coup, and when Akhenaten died, his successors, including Tuthad, to clean up the mess. That included erasing heresy, reinstating the old gods, and possibly repurposing burial goods in a time of political and economic turmoil. Nefertiti, Akhenaten's queen, and possibly one of his successors, vanished from history under mysterious circumstances. If her burial was halted, her treasures, including a golden death mask, might have been recycled for Tutankhamun's rushed interment. Egypt was short on time, short on resources, and desperate to restore order. Reusing a mask was practical, politically expedient, and if Nefertiti was already being erased from the official narrative, who would notice? Answer: modern science. X-ray fluorescence, electron microscopy. These technologies have allowed researchers to peer beneath the mask's surface. They found evidence of cold welding, meaning the face was likely added to an existing headdress. The inlay work doesn't quite match. Even the contours of the face are different from other representations of Tutankhamun. He had a pronounced overbite, a genetic quirk of the royal line. The mask, smooth, symmetrical, idealized. Not him. And if it's not him, where is his real mask? That's the part no one knows. Maybe it never existed. Maybe Tutankhamun died so suddenly, possibly from a broken leg, an infection, or malaria, that artisans had no time to complete a personalized mask. Maybe they raided the treasury, found something exquisite, scrubbed the name, changed the cartouches, and made do. Or maybe his real mask was lost in the chaos of succession. Looted, buried in another tomb, melted down, or still lying somewhere beneath the sands, waiting. Because here's the irony. Despite being the most famous tomb ever found, Tutankhamun's was a botched burial. The tomb is tiny, hastily painted, not originally built for a king. It's possible the tomb belonged to someone else entirely. Perhaps Queen Khiand was repurposed in desperation. The sarcophagus doesn't quite fit. The walls are unevenly plastered. Some artifacts seem recycled from earlier reigns. So why does the mask matter? Because in ancient Egypt, the death mask wasn't just decoration, it was spiritual technology. The mask helped the soul recognize its body in the afterlife. It was identity, eternalized. Wearing someone else's face into the next world? That's not just a paperwork error, that's a metaphysical crisis. If Tutankhamun wore the face of Nefertiti into death, it rewrites everything. It collapses the boundary between the Amarna heresy and the Restoration period. It suggests that even in death, Tutankhamun's reign was haunted by politics, by propaganda, by a mother figure whose presence could not be erased, only rebranded. And here's the twist. If the original mask still exists somewhere, it could be the most important artifact never found, not just for Egyptology, but for understanding how regimes rewrite memory, how identity is fluid, fragile, and weaponized, how even kings can be buried under borrowed faces. The true face of Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, the bard, the swan of Avon, the guy whose words shaped the English language and the human psyche like few others ever have. His plays are performed every day somewhere in the world. His name is carved into the marble canon of world literature. And yet, here's the weirdest part of all. We don't actually know what he looked like. Seriously. The most famous writer in the history of the English language, and we have no confirmed image of him made while he was alive. No portrait from life, no sketches, no death mask. Nothing you can point to and say, yes, that's him. Every depiction we have is either posthumous, contested, or just plain suspicious. This is not a joke. This is a real historical gap, a missing face. And it's made weirder by how present Shakespeare feels. His words are everywhere. To be or not to be. All the world's a stage. A rose by any other name. You probably quote him without knowing it. But would you recognize him if he passed you on the street? Let's look at what we do have. There's the Droshout engraving, published on the title page of the first folio in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died. It's not flattering. The face is flat, the eyes off, the expression weirdly vacant. Ben Jonson, who knew Shakespeare, approved the image. But come on, this thing looks like it was drawn from a mannequin, not a man. It's stiff, stylized, possibly copied from a death mask or an older sketch. But it's not the lively, penetrating gaze you'd expect from the author of Hamlet and King Lear. Then there's the Chandos portrait, housed in the National Portrait Gallery in London. This one feels right, at least emotionally. The earring, the slightly receding hairline, the thoughtful eyes. This is the Shakespeare of modern movie posters. But the problem? We don't know who painted it, or when, or if it's even Shakespeare at all. The identification comes from oral tradition, not hard evidence. There's also the Cobb portrait, claimed to be a life portrait of Shakespeare, and even the Sanders portrait, which dates to 1603 and has some tantalizing handwriting on the back, but both are disputed. Experts argue over provenance, style, technique. No portrait has been definitively authenticated. And that leaves us in an absurd place. We know more about Shakespeare's literary legacy than we do about the guy's cheekbones. We have mountains of scholarship on his themes, his influences, even his handwriting. But we don't have his face. We have Shakespeare, but we don't have Shakespeare. So how did this happen? Partly, it's the nature of Elizabethan England. Portraits were expensive, reserved for nobility. Shakespeare, though famous in his own time, wasn't born into wealth. He became successful, yes. Owned property, had influence. But he wasn't a duke. He wasn't an aristocrat. He didn't commission a grand oil painting to hang in a family estate. And if he did, it hasn't survived. Then there's the cultural context. In Shakespeare's era, writers weren't celebrities the way they are now. Their works mattered more than their selfies. And in a time before photography, likenesses had to be intentionally preserved. If no one cared to capture your face in oils or marble, history just moved on without it. But here's the twist. The missing face has become part of the mystique. The enigma of Shakespeare fuels obsession. It opens doors to conspiracy. Some people don't believe he existed at all or think William Shakespeare was a pen name for someone else, like Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. Part of their argument? We don't even know what he looked like. And that's where things get weird. There's a kind of uncanny valley in trying to reconstruct the real man behind the myth. Forensic artists have tried to build facial reconstructions from skull casts of dubious origin. AI has been trained on contemporary likenesses to generate probabilistic faces. But all of it is guesswork, digital fiction. Because maybe the point isn't what Shakespeare looked like. Maybe it's what he saw. He gave us Hamlet's melancholy, Othello's jealousy, Lear's madness, and Juliet's yearning. Maybe the mystery of his face is a feature, not a bug. Maybe the facelessness makes it easier for everyone to find a little of themselves in his characters. Still, you can't help but wonder, what kind of man could hold so many worlds in his mind? Was he intense, playful, wry, sad-eyed? Did he carry the look of a dreamer or a killer or both? There's something unnerving in how little we know. No letters in his own hand survive, no diary, no sketch made from life. Shakespeare is a name and a voice, but not a face. And the longer the mystery lingers, the more we fill it in with projection, like a Rorschach test in Ruff and Doublet. But if we could find a genuine portrait, imagine the impact. Suddenly, the bard has flesh. Suddenly, the ghost becomes a man. He'd be more than a silhouette behind some of the greatest lines in literature. He'd be real. Maybe the portrait is still out there, in a private collection, misidentified in an attic, tucked behind another canvas, waiting. But until it surfaces, Shakespeare remains the most vividly invisible person in history. And while the hunt for his face continues in archives and attics, our next mystery is even more intangible. Less about the seen, more about the sensed. It's not about image or artifact. It's about scent. A lost aroma so powerful it once defined cultures and vanished with time. Let's dive into the olfactory oblivion of ancient perfumes. The scent of ancient perfumes. Try to remember a smell, not just any smell, your most vivid one. Bread in a childhood kitchen, your grandmother's perfume, a lover's skin in summer. Now imagine losing that memory forever. That's what happened to civilization. Entire scent worlds forgotten. Not just lost to time, but completely unrecognizable. Because smell is the most fragile sense, the most ephemeral. And in the long, crumbling corridor of history, ancient perfumes are ghosts we can't chase. They evaporated, dissolved, left behind only whispers in broken bottles and poetry. This is not just a quirky historical footnote. Perfume, in the ancient world, was power. It was medicine, ritual, eroticism, status. Entire economies were built on scent. Wars were fought over myrrh. Sacred rituals soaked in frankincense. Love affairs bloomed and rotted in clouds of spikenard and cinnamon. Cleopatra famously bathed in rose oil and seduced with jasmine. The Romans perfumed not just their bodies, but their pets, furniture, and even horses. And yet, we don't know what they actually smelled like. Let that sink in. We found their temples, translated their tablets, rebuilt their diets. We even know their fashion, but we have no real access to the world of their noses. It's as if the entire sensual backdrop of their lives has gone dark, because scent doesn't fossilize. The containers survive delicate alabaster flasks from Egypt, ornate amphorae from Greece, Roman glass bottles still smelling faintly of resin, but the contents? Evaporated, turned to dust. Even if residue remains, the volatile compounds the ones that actually make a smell are long gone. They degrade, break apart, mutate. What we're left with is the aromatic equivalent of static. Sure, we have recipes. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia list ingredients: cedar wood, galbanum, cypress, cassia. The Ebers papyrus from Egypt describes how to steep myrrh and wine. The Greeks wrote of Kythia complex incense blend used in temples. The Romans were obsessed with perfume. Pliny, the Elder, cataloged dozens. And yet, reading those recipes is like looking at a photo of a thunderstorm. It doesn't feel like being there. Because ancient perfumery wasn't just chemistry, was art, a ritual, a secret language of oils, resins, and timing. They aged perfumes like wine, blended them by moon phase, buried amphorae underground to mature them. Scents weren't just made, they were cured into being. And without that exact process, modern reconstructions are educated guesses, approximations, smells that echo the past without ever truly touching it. This matters because scent is memory's trigger finger. It bypasses rational thought, hits you in the gut. The right smell can drop you into a moment faster than any photograph. And history, without its smells, is history half remembered, sterilized, flattened. If you want to feel the ancient world, you need to breathe it in. And then there's the possibility that some of these ancient scents weren't just beautiful, they were addictive, psychoactive, even hallucinogenic. Consider Kyphi again. This wasn't just insensate, was a spiritual weapon, burned in temples to honor the gods, calm the sick, and induce dreams. Its blend of over a dozen ingredients could have created a slow, layered sensory assault. The ancients believed scent bridged the human and the divine, that certain aromas could open the soul, connect you to the afterlife. There's even evidence some perfumes were used as status indicators. You could tell someone's class by how they smelled. Perfume was social armor. So what happened? Why don't we have these smells anymore? Time, conquest, climate, and ironically progress. As empires fell, trade routes collapsed, trees were chopped, recipes were guarded, then forgotten. And with the rise of synthetic chemistry in the modern era, ancient blends fell out of favor. The perfumer's art became industrial, streamlined, westernized. And we lost not just the formulas but the philosophy. There have been attempts to resurrect them. Archaeologists have scraped the insides of ancient jars for residue. Chemists have analyzed the molecular remnants. In 2012, a team even reconstructed a scent from a 2000-year-old tomb in Cyprus what they called the world's oldest perfume, and it smelled fine, floral, medicinal, but not the divine vapor Cleopatra wore when she sailed down the Nile, not the spiced dream fog that once filled a Roman bathhouse. Because some things can't be brought back. You can mix the same ingredients, follow the ancient steps, but the trees have changed. The resins are different. The soil is different. Even the noses are different. Our scent memory is not theirs. We are divorced from the olfactory world our ancestors inhabited. But what if you could experience it? What if we could find a perfectly sealed bottle, untouched by time? Crack it open. Inhale. It would be a portal, a visceral jolt into the past. Not words on a page, not a statue in a museum, but presence. A moment when history breathes through your nose. And for a heartbeat, you're not just learning about the past, you're in it. That's the seduction of lost perfumes. They are the sensory ghosts of history, and like all ghosts, they haunt us because they are just out of reach. But while perfumes disappeared through evaporation and erosion, there's another ancient wonder that vanished in a more violent, deliberate way. Not just lost, but disassembled, stolen, and erased in wartime. Next, we unravel the tangled gears of mystery behind the most sophisticated artifact, the ancient Greeks' ever-built-an object that challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient science. Prepare to meet the Antikythera Mechanism, the missing manual that might have told us how it worked. The Antikythera Mechanism's instructions. In 1901, off the rocky coast of Antikythera, Greek sponge divers stumbled upon a shipwreck. Ancient, Roman era, crusted in coral and centuries. Among the statues and amphorae was something that didn't make sense. A lump of bronze and wood, decayed, fragmented, but inside it gears. Not just gears, precision gears. Clockwork. Thousands of years ahead of its time. It took decades to realize what they'd found. The Antikythera Mechanism, a machine so advanced it shouldn't exist. A Greek computer, built in the 2nd century BCE, capable of modeling the movements of the sun, the moon, and possibly the planets. It predicted eclipses, calculated calendars, tracked Olympic Games. This was not just a curiosity. It was the crown jewel of ancient engineering. An analog device so sophisticated that nothing like it would be built again for over 1,000 years. And yet, we barely understand it. Why? Because while we have the gears, we don't have the instructions. Let that sink in. Imagine finding a MacBook on a desert island in 800 AD. You'd marvel at it. Maybe crack the case. Notice the circuits. But without power, without a manual, you'd never know its full function. That's us with the Antikythera Mechanism. We have the shell, the mechanics, but the manual, the written explanation that would have come with itis, gone. This isn't just a hardware problem, it's a cosmic tragedy. Because whoever built this thing wasn't just a craftsman, they were a genius. Someone understood not only gear ratios and metallurgy, but astronomy. Celestial cycles, lunar irregularities. They encoded centuries of sky into spirals of bronze. It's the closest thing the ancient world had to artificial intelligence. And someone taught them how to build it. That's the missing link. Because the Antikythera Mechanism didn't appear from nowhere. You don't wake up and invent differential gearing. This technology implies a lineage, a school, a workshop, a world of lost engineers, philosophers, and tinkerers who didn't just gaze at the stars, they measured them, modeled them, and turned them into mathematics. And yet, the texts that might have explained this lineage? Gone. Aristarchus of Samos had a heliocentric theory. Hipparchus of Nicaea charted lunar cycles. Archimedes wrote about mechanical devices. But the original treatises, the handbooks, the technical diagrams? Lost. Some to fire, others to conquest. Most to the slow, silent erosion of parchment and papyrus. Alexandria might have held them. Pergamon might have copied them. But all we have now are fragments. Scattered citations, hints, which makes the mechanism not just a marvel, but a message in a bottle. Its components are exquisite. Over 30 bronze gears cut with teeth smaller than grains of rice. A dial on the back showing the 23-month Saros eclipse cycle. Another modeling the metonic cycle of the moon. A front dial showing the zodiac and solar positions. And a tiny dial, possibly for the 4-year Olympiad cycle. This wasn't a toy, it was a system. A worldview, rendered in bronze. But here's the kicker, the inscriptions. Some of the mechanism's pieces include tiny, faint Greek lettering, labels, notes, possibly parts of the original manual. Scholars have used X-ray tomography to read them, line by line. And what they've found is tantalizing. References to lunar phases, instructions on setting dates, technical terms that suggest this was one of many devices. Not a prototype, not a fluke, but a product of a lost tradition. And the fact that it was found on a shipwreck? That makes sense. These things were portable, valuable, possibly used in schools, temples, or for navigation. This wasn't hidden away in some philosopher's lab. It was out in the world, used, transported. But that also means there were others. Other mechanisms, other devices, other manuals. So, where are they? Gone. Looted. Burned. Melted down for bronze. Destroyed by invading armies, religious purges, or time itself. Bronze was expensive, valuable. If someone didn't understand what it was, they might have scrapped it. Recast the gears into weapons or tools. Just another relic of a forgotten empire. And that's what makes the loss of the instructions so cruel. Because the mechanism proves that the ancients weren't just staring at stars, they were computing them. Imagine what else they built. Imagine what they knew. What if there was a whole category of tech we've never seen? Mechanical calculators, astronomical simulators, clocks, compasses, all wiped out before the first medieval engineer ever picked up a chisel. The Antikythera Mechanism isn't just an anomaly, it's a keyhole, and the door it opens is missing. Now, researchers have used modern tool CT scans, 3D modeling, AI reconstructions to reverse engineer the device. They've built replicas, proposed theories, written books. But all of it is guesswork. Informed, brilliant guesswork, but still speculation, because without the manual, we don't know what its creators intended, what they prioritized, what they saw when they turned the dial. And maybe we never will, because that's the real heartbreak of the Antikythera Mechanism. Not that we lost the object. We have the object, we've seen it, we've held it, but we don't have the mind that made it, the vision. The context, the ghost in the machine. But while the Antikythera was a glimpse into the clockwork of the cosmos, our next mystery is something altogether different. It's not about science or computation, it's not gears, it's glyphs. A language carved into clay and stone, left behind by a brilliant civilization whose voice has gone silent. We see their cities, we see their art, but we can't hear their words. Next, we break open the enigma of the Minoan language linear and the ancient secrets it still refuses to tell. The Minoan language, linear A. There's a silence in history louder than any war drum. It's the silence of a lost language, a voice frozen in stone, etched in clay, calling across 4,000 years, but never answered. It's not that we don't see it. We do. It's right there, written in careful lines on tablets and seals and potsherds across the ruins of ancient Crete. It's called Linear A, and we have no idea what it says. No idea. Let that land with full weight. One of the oldest writing systems in Europe, possibly, the first has survived in hundreds of examples. We know what it looks like. We've studied its signs. We've cataloged its patterns, and yet, we can't read a single sentence. Not definitively, not fluently, not even close. The Minoans, the civilization behind it, were one of the great mysteries of the Bronze Age, before the Mycenaeans, before classical Greece. They built palaces, painted vibrant frescoes, sailed to Egypt and Syria, and developed a complex society on Crete, the beating heart of the Aegean world. And they wrote, but their language, their thoughts, their poems, their records, their prayers, still sealed. Linear A is so named because it's written in linear strokes, unlike the pictorial symbols of Egyptian hieroglyphs or Sumerian cuneiform. It dates back to at least 1,800 BCE, and it's everywhere. Found on temple records, votive offerings, accounting ledgers, even labels for jars of oil and wine. It clearly had multiple functions: sacred, administrative, maybe even poetic. But we can't unlock it. Why not? Because language isn't just symbols, it's context. And we're missing the Rosetta Stone. The breakthrough that cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs was a trilingual inscription: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, all saying the same thing. A cheat sheet. Linear A has no such companion. It exists in a vacuum, untranslated, isolated, and as the Minoan civilization collapsed, so did its voice. What we do have is Linear B. Linear B, used later by the Mycenaeans, is a descendant of Linear A. We cracked that one in the 1950s thanks to Michael Ventris. It turned out to be an early form of Greek. That helped, sort of, because some symbols in Linear B are the same as those in Linear A. Same shape, same phonetic value. But here's the twist. When you apply those values to Linear A texts, they make no sense. It's like reading Spanish words with Italian pronunciation. You get syllables, but not meaning, which suggests the Minoans spoke a different language altogether, not Greek, not Indo-European. Something older, stranger, a linguistic orphan. Some scholars call it Minoan. Others don't even try to label it. It might have links to Anatolia, or the Caucasus, or even the Near East. It might be a language isolotone that developed entirely on its own. We don't know. We're not even sure if it was spoken or purely written. Some believe it recorded a liturgical or priestly tongue used only in rituals. Others think it was the everyday speech of a thriving maritime culture. Either way, the lack of bilingual texts means we're guessing in the dark. And that guessing gets weird. Because some words seem familiar. They show up over and over. Repetitive symbols, structured lines. Some scholars think they've identified terms for wine, oil, or grain. Maybe names of gods or kings. But that's the thing about patterns, they can deceive. You see what you want to see. Without grammar, without syntax, without confirmed meanings, it's all sandcastles. But why does it matter? Because Linear A isn't just a code, it's a consciousness, a window into one of the world's first urban societies, a civilization with plumbing, fashion, art, and trade routes that stretched across seas. We see their world in vivid frescoes, blue-skinned gods, bull-leaping athletes, women with elaborate curls and bare chests, all caught mid-motion. They're talking to us, smiling at us, and we can't reply. It's a maddening intimacy. Like watching a film on mute, subtitles gone, actors mouthing lines you'll never hear. Their language is right there, in their temples, their warehouses, their homes. And it might hold answers to everything. How they worshipped, how they ruled, how they thought about time, love, death, and more than that, it might be the missing piece of the Mediterranean puzzle. Because the Minoans influenced the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans seeded Greek culture. Greece birthed the philosophical foundations of the West. Linear A isn't a dead end, it's a root. A neural spark in the brainstem of civilization. And if we could read it, we might find that ideas we thought were born in Athens began centuries earlier, in Knossos or Phaistos. So why haven't we cracked it? Because ancient languages are stubborn. They require context, vocabulary, bilinguals, and Linear A offers none of those. No, I am the king's stellis, no marketplace graffiti. Just rows of inscrutable lines. But that doesn't mean hope is lost. Machine learning, digital scanning, and comparative linguistics are opening new doors. Researchers are feeding Linear A into AI, looking for statistical patterns that match known languages. It's early days. But promising. One day, someone might find a buried tablet, a bilingual inscription, or some bored Minoan scribe might have doodled a translation in the margins. Stranger things have happened. And when that day comes, the silence breaks. We'll hear the Minoans for the first time in 4,000 years, not just through their art, not just through their ruins, but in their own words. Until then, Linear A is the oldest unsolved manuscript in Europe. But it's not the only map we can't read. Because while the Minoans wrote in mystery, another artifact thousands of miles away mapped coastlines centuries before it made sense to. A chart so accurate, so bizarre, it shouldn't exist. Next, we set sail on the mystery of the Piri Reis Map, the ancient source material that vanished with time. We're 8 mysteries deep, and if your brain isn't melting yet, you're built different. Real quick, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because we're only halfway through this spiral into the forgotten and the next twists are even weirder. The Piri Reis Map's source material. In 1929, a strange artifact resurfaced in the Ottoman Imperial Palace Library in Istanbul. A piece of parchment, faded and cracked, barely surviving centuries of war and weather. At first glance, it was a map, nothing unusual. But then people started looking closer. The lines, the proportions, the coastlines. And then came the question that echoed through the academic world. How in the hell did this thing exist? Because the Piri Reis Map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, doesn't just depict parts of Europe, North Africa, and Brazil. It includes the coast of South America in stunning detail and what some believe is the coast of Antarctica, but not modern Antarctica, ice-free Antarctica, which, according to geologists, hasn't been that way for thousands of years. Let's be clear, the map isn't complete, it's just a fragment, about a third of a larger chart. But what's visible is enough to send shockwaves. The accuracy of the South American coastline alone is uncanny. Piri Reis himself wrote in the margins that he based his work on older maps, some from Portuguese explorers, some from ancient sources, drawn in the days of Alexander the Great. Let's pause on that. Because Piri Reis didn't invent the geography, he compiled it. From other charts. Some recent, some ancient. Which means he had access to source material we no longer have. Maps that have vanished. Gone. Possibly destroyed. Possibly lost in some private library or monastery archive. Or maybe burned with the rest of humanity's memory when Alexandria went up in flames. So what were these lost sources? Some researchers believe they were Phoenician, others say Roman. Still, others speculate Egyptian or even Atlantean, if you're feeling generous with your tinfoil. But the common thread is this: whoever made those original maps had knowledge far beyond what 15th century Europe was supposed to have. Let's talk about that alleged Antarctica section. It's hotly debated. Skeptics argue it's just a misrepresentation of the southern South American coast. Others say it matches the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica under the ice, which, if true, would imply the original source was thousands of years old, created when the continent was still ice-free. Geologists estimate the last time Antarctica was fully deglaciated was about 6,000 years ago, possibly earlier. But mainstream history places the rise of advanced cartography in the Renaissance, or at best, the Hellenistic period. So how could a pre-modern civilization chart a frozen continent? Cue the theories. One theory: ancient mariners, possibly Phoenicians, or even earlier culture circumnavigated the globe and mapped the coasts using primitive but effective methods. They passed this knowledge down through secret channels, guarded by scholars or guilds. Another: these maps were made using land-based observation, trade route accumulation, and oral transmission over centuries, slowly compiled into more accurate forms. Then there's the fringe theory, that there was a forgotten high civilization, think Atlantis, or a pre-Ice Age society that possessed advanced navigation and mapping skills. That it was wiped out in a cataclysm, and its maps survived only in fragments. Whatever your flavor of speculation, the bottom line is this: the Piri Reis Map shows more than it should, and that alone makes it an anomaly, a historical red flag waving frantically in the wind of time. Now, let's get into the cartographic guts. The map uses a Portolan style common among Mediterranean sailors, with radiating lines and windroses. But it also includes latitude markings and what might be attempts at longitude centuries before the invention of accurate chronometers. That means whoever made the originals had some concept of a global grid system, which, again, is far ahead of its time. And it's not just the Piri Reis Map. Other maps from the same era, the Oronce Fine Map, the Mercator Projection, the Boach Map, contain similar anomalies. Coastlines drawn with impossible precision. Land masses, where there shouldn't be knowledge of land masses. It's like humanity once had a master copy, and over time, the pieces broke apart and drifted. But Piri Reis is different because he told us what he was doing. In the margins of the map, he wrote about the sources. He credited 10 older maps, including Arab charts and 4 Portuguese ones. But he also mentioned maps from ancient times, ones that depicted the world before the age of exploration. And we don't have those maps. They're gone, burned, forgotten, locked in some moldy vault, or simply lost to time like so many scrolls, scripts, and secrets. So, what do we make of it? At minimum, the Piri Reis Map proves that the people of the ancient and medieval worlds knew more than we often give them credit for. They were not blind. They were not bound to tiny villages and mythic coastlines. They were explorers, collectors, compilers of memory. And somewhere along the way, we lost the best parts of their legacy. Maybe it was war. Maybe it was decay. Maybe it was arrogance. The belief that we didn't need old maps anymore, that modern knowledge had outpaced the ancients, so we let their scrolls rot. Their libraries burn. Their cartographers become legends instead of teachers. And maybe, just maybe, one of those original maps is still out there in a monastery in Armenia, in a Turkish archive, mislabeled as tax records, in a cave, in a chest, in a dream. Until then, the Piri Reis Map remains a fingerprint of a missing world, a puzzle with half its pieces burned. But while this mystery deals in coastlines and cartography, the next one is scratched deep into the earth itself. Symbols so vast they can only be seen from the sky. Drawn by a culture we barely understand, for reasons we still can't confirm. It's time to walk the desert and trace the lines. Next, we try to decode the massive riddle of the Nazca Lines and what message they were really trying to send. The Nazca Lines, full meaning. You have to fly to see them. No, really, unless you're in a plane, they're just scratches and dirt. But from above, they become something else. Lines, shapes, spirals, giant birds. Monkeys, spiders. Astronaut, seriously, one of them looks like a man waving at the stars. Welcome to the Nazca Desert in southern Peru, where one of history's greatest open-air enigmas sprawls across 170 square miles of arid plain, over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, 70 biomorphic figures, etched into the earth over 2,000 years ago. And to this day, we still don't know why. It's one of the most bizarre and compelling mysteries of archaeology. The Nazca Lines were created by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the surface of the desert, revealing a yellow-gray subsoil. That's it. No pigment, no construction. Just subtraction. But done on a scale that defies logic. Some of the figures stretch over 1,200 feet, a hummingbird the size of a football field, a condor with a 440-foot wingspan. Who does that? And more importantly, why? The Nazca people flourished from around 100 BCE to 800 CE. They were incredible engineers. Their underground aqueducts, known as puquios, still function today. But the lines? The lines are different. They're not functional in any obvious way. They're not decorative in any obvious way. They're deliberate, monumental, and mostly invisible unless you're in the air, which is, of course, the core of the enigma. Because the Nazca had no known flying technology, no hot air balloons, no aircraft. So why design something that can only be appreciated from a height they couldn't reach? That's the first mystery. The second? We have no written records from the Nazca civilization. No codices, no inscriptions, no definitive texts explaining their cosmology or ritual practices. Everything we know comes from their ceramics, their textiles, their burial practices, and these lines. It's like trying to understand a language when all you have are its billboards. So the theories pour in. Theory 1. Astronomy. Some believe the lines functioned as a massive celestial calendar. Piri Reis, the most devoted Nazca researcher of the 20th century, spent decades measuring angles and alignments. She believed the lines pointed to solstices, equinoxes, and star positions. A giant observatory, Earth's chalkboard for tracking the heavens. And there's evidence some lines do align with solar and lunar events. But not all, not even most. Theory 2. Ritual pathways. The lines were meant to be walked, pilgrimages across sacred space, maybe leading to water sources or connecting spiritual sites. The geoglyphs then become part of a ritual performance, a sacred procession carved directly into the earth. And sure enough, many lines don't end at images, they cross them, intersect them. They're not art in the Western sense. They're not meant to be seen from a distance. They're meant to be used. Theory 3. Water. In the driest desert on Earth, water is life. Some researchers think the lines correspond with underground aquifers, that the shapes invoke rain gods or water spirits, that the Nazca were engraving prayers into the earth itself, pleading for survival. Some figures, like the frog, seem to support this. Others, like the whale, is so. Theory 4. Alien runways. Yeah, you knew it was coming. Eric von Däniken's infamous Chariots of the Gods proposed that the Nazca Lines were landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors. The astronaut figure is cited as proof. The sheer scale? Impossible for ancient people. Never mind that all evidence contradicts this and that the lines can be constructed with basic surveying tools and a decent plan. But the theory persists. Because when mystery meets grandeur, fringe speculation thrives. But here's the truth. None of these theories fully explain the lines. Some geoglyphs are purely geometric. Others are naturalistic. Some appear in clusters. Others are isolated. They span centuries of construction, different generations added to them. It wasn't a single project. It was a tradition, a living landscape of meaning. And then there's the question of intent. Were the Nazca Lines meant to be seen from above? Or was the act of making them the point? Maybe creating something massive, permanent, and sacred was itself the ritual. A way of turning empty desert into a living altar. The figures monkeys, hummingbirds, jaguars might not be symbols for gods. They might be gods, drawn into the ground to bind spirit and soil. And here's what makes the mystery even better. We're still finding new lines. As recently as 2019, researchers using drones and satellite imagery have discovered dozens of new figuresums so faint they're invisible from the ground. Technology is unearthing a deeper layer of this enigma. And with each new find, the narrative shifts, gets more complicated, more interesting. Because the Nazca Lines aren't just messages, they're an entire library written in terrain, a script with no alphabet, a voice with no grammar, a story whose first and last pages are missing. And while some lines may point to the stars or springs or gods, others might have been personal, family marks, clan identifiers, territorial claims, artistic experiments. Who says ancient cultures didn't doodle on a massive scale? Whatever the answer, the lines remain. Unfaded, unchanged, waiting. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the meaning isn't in the explanation, it's in the wonder. In the idea that humans once made art so massive and meticulous for reasons we may never fully grasp. That even in a world without modern tools or electricity or airplanes, they looked up not just with their eyes, but with their imaginations and made something for the sky. But while the Nazca Lines were etched into earth with intention, our next mystery is what happens when intention is erased. Not a natural loss, but a deliberate purge. A genocide of memory, executed with fire and fanaticism. Let's turn the page literally and examine the burning of the Mayan Codices and how the Spanish conquest set fire to an entire civilization's knowledge. The Mayan Codices, most of them. You can almost hear the crackle, not the warm, comforting kind from a hearth. No, this is the sound of fire-eating history page by page, glyph by glyph, a roaring purge of ink and meaning. The sound of silence being imposed on a civilization. It's the 16th century. The Spanish have arrived in the Yucatan. And they're not just conquering land, they're conquering memory. The Maya, one of the most sophisticated ancient civilizations in the Americas, wrote books, real books, codices. Made from bark paper, specifically from the inner bark of the ficus, tree-coated in a lime-based wash to create a white, smooth surface, folded accordion style. Written in hieroglyphic script, painted with astonishing precision, these codices were repositories of astronomical data, ritual calendars, pharmacology, history, mythology. They were not casual notebooks. They were sacred and scientific texts, created by trained scribes called Aj Tiasib. And we had thousands of them. Until we didn't. Because when Spanish conquistadors and Catholic missionaries arrived, they saw more than ink on pages. They saw heresy, paganism, demonic symbols. To them, the glyphs weren't language. They were threats. So they did what colonizers do. When confronted with indigenous knowledge, they burned it. The worst of it came in 1562. A Franciscan friar named Diego de Landa, eager to purify the local population, ordered a massive auto de fe in the town of Mani. Hundreds of Maya idols were smashed, altars destroyed. And the books? He wrote in his own account, "We found a large number of books written in these characters, and as they contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all." That was it. Gone. In one righteous inferno, centuries of accumulated knowledge, entire libraries reduced to ash. The Maya, who had charted the cycles of Venus with more accuracy than any European astronomer, who had recorded dynastic histories spanning centuries, who had mapped the cosmos with staggering precision, were silenced. Their voice turned to smoke. Today, only 4 Mayan codices are known to survive. 4. Out of potentially thousands: the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the Grolier Codex, also known as the Mexico Codex, whose authenticity was debated for decades before finally being accepted as genuine. That's it. That's the entire surviving literary canon of a civilization that rivaled the Greeks and the Egyptians in complexity and insight. 4 books. And they are miraculous. The Dresden Codex is the most studied. It's an astronomical almanac, filled with data on eclipses, the movements of Venus, ritual cycles. It's a glimpse into the Maya obsession with Timaeus' sacred architecture of days and numbers, gods and fates, folded into every page. The Madrid Codex is a more diverse document. It includes rituals, divination, ceremonies, agriculture. It's believed to be the work of multiple scribes, a communal book, a living document. It reads like a manual for how to exist in a world guided by cycles and gods. The Paris Codex is fragmentary, but contains calendrical tables and zodiacal signs. The Grolier Codex, discovered in a cave and published in the 1970s, focuses on Venus and warrior deities. It is raw, unadorned, possibly a field manual for ritual practice. But 4 books can't tell the whole story. Imagine if we had only 4 books from ancient Greece. No Homer, no Plato, no Aristotle. Just 4 pamphlets. Imagine trying to reconstruct their entire worldview from that. That's what we face with the Maya. An intellectual universe glimpsed through a keyhole. And here's the real tragedy. The Maya are still here. Their descendants still live in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Still speak Mayan languages. Still preserve aspects of traditional culture. But their ancient voice, their own written words, was nearly extinguished by people who thought they were saving souls by burning books. Yet, the story isn't entirely hopeless. Because the Maya didn't just write on codices, they carved into stone, painted on ceramics, etched glyphs into temple walls and staircases, and from those inscriptions, those more permanent vessels of thought, modern epigraphers have been slowly, methodically, deciphering the script. It started in the 20th century. Scholars like Yuri Norisov, Tatiana Proskoryakov, and Linda Shalay began to break the code. They proved that the glyphs were not just symbolic or decorative, they were phonetic, syllabic. They could be read. Today, we can read hundreds of Maya glyphs. Not all, not fluently, but enough to reconstruct history. We now know about battles, alliances, births, deaths, poetic metaphors, and political propaganda. We've started to hear the Maya voice again. But without the full codices, it's like trying to understand Shakespeare by reading inscriptions on gravestones. We need the books, the nuance, the context, the intellectual and emotional heartbeat of a people. And that's why the loss of the Mayan codices is more than cultural, it's existential. It's the erasure of thought, of memory, of dreams. It also makes you wonder, are there others? Codices buried in undiscovered tombs, hidden in caves, stashed away by scribes who knew what was coming, sheltered in remote villages, waiting. Because knowledge doesn't just die. It hides, it waits, and sometimes it returns. But while the Maya's books were erased by fire, our next mystery involves something far more elusive, a sacred relic, a weapon of myth, an object of divine wrath and impossible power. and no one knows where it went. Next, we begin the search for the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest missing artifact in human history. The location of the Ark of the Covenant. If you grew up on a diet of Sunday school, Indiana Jones, or conspiracy documentaries with a little too much dramatic music, you already know the legend. A golden chest, winged angels on the lid, thunder inside. The Ark of the Covenant, said to hold the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, said to part rivers, level cities, kill armies, and summon God's voice. Said to be the holiest object ever crafted by human hands, and no one can say with certainty where it is. That's not a metaphor. That's a literal mystery. The Ark of the Covenant is missing, not destroyed, not definitively buried missing. Vanished into myth sometime after the first temple in Jerusalem was destroyed around 586 BCE by the Babylonians. And for nearly 2,600 years, the world has been asking one question: where did it go? The Bible gives us specifics about its construction. Acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold, roughly 4 feet long, 2.5 feet tall. 2 cherubim on top, wings outstretched, forming a throne for the invisible presence of Yahweh. It was carried on poles never touched, guarded, feared. Placed in the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum of Solomon's temple, only the high priest could approach it. Once a year, with blood. It wasn't just a container, it was a weapon, a divine interface. When the Israelites carried it into battle, they won. When they disrespected it, they died. People opened it and were consumed. Entire armies fell. It didn't just hold commandments, it held power. So how does something like that just disappear? That's where the theories begin. Theory 1. It was hidden before the Babylonian invasion. The priests, knowing Jerusalem was about to fall, secreted it away. Maybe underground. Maybe in a remote cave. Possibly in the Judean desert. This idea has precedent. Sacred objects were hidden throughout Jewish history during times of crisis. But if it was hidden, it was hidden well. We've searched. We're still searching. Theory 2. It was taken to Babylon and lost. The Babylonians destroyed the first temple and carried off treasures, but the ark isn't listed among the loot. In the Book of Kings, the list of temple spoils is detailed golden vessels, pillars, basins, but no ark. That absence is suspicious, like maybe it was already gone. Theory 3. It was taken to Egypt. There are references, apocryphal, disputed, to a migration of Levites to Egypt, bringing sacred relics with them. Some believe it was carried down the Nile, eventually to the island of Elephantine. The problem? No archaeological evidence, only conjecture and fragmented texts. Theory 4. Ethiopia. This is the big one. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to possess the Ark. Not a replica, the actual Ark. They say it was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to Ethiopian tradition, Menelik visited Jerusalem, was given the Ark by divine will, and brought it to Axum. It's said to rest in the Church of St. Mary of Zion, guarded by a single monk who never leaves the compound and never allows anyone to see it. No tests, no photos, no confirmation, which of course only fuels the legend. Some researchers have tried to investigate. Graham Hancock, in his controversial book The Sign and the Seal, laid out a theory connecting the Ark to Ethiopia through centuries of migration, war, and secrecy. Others dismissed the Ethiopian claim, suggesting what's in the church may be a replica or a relic of lesser power. But here's the thing. Every time someone tries to get closer, the trail goes cold. The Ark, like its legend, is slippery. Then there's the wildcard theory: Templar involvement. The idea that Crusaders found the Ark, or something like it, in Jerusalem and smuggled it out. That it lies buried in a French chapel, a Scottish castle, or under the Vatican. You'll find versions of this in everything from historical fiction to the esoteric corners of Reddit. All of this, every lead, every theory, comes back to one cold fact. We've never found anything we can definitively prove is the Ark. Nothing. No wood fragments, no inscriptions, no cherubim, no radiation burns. Nothing. And yet, the story won't die. Why? Because the Ark is more than an artifact. It's a symbol of divine law, of divine presence, of the untouchable sacred. It represents the idea that something could be made so holy, so potent, so real, that it alters the fabric of reality just by existing. And maybe, just maybe, it's still out there. Sealed in a tomb, hidden in a vault, buried under a temple. Or if you believe the wilder theories, removed entirely from our plane. Taken by God, like Enoch or Elijah. Not destroyed, not forgotten, just relocated. Because that's the kind of story the Ark demands. It's not just lost, it's waiting. Waiting for a time when it can return, when it can once again sit at the center of faith, fear, and fire. And until then, we search, with shovels, with satellites, with stories. But if the Ark is the ultimate sacred object lost to myth, the next mystery is far more physical, tangible, measurable in carats and weight, not divine law, but imperial luxury. Next, we track down 7 imperial treasures from Tsarist Russia, priceless Faberge Easter eggs that vanished during revolution and war. Let's open the hunt for the missing Romanov imperial eggs. The Romanov imperial Easter eggs, missing ones. They were never meant to be lost. They were meant to dazzle, to sit beneath the chandeliers of Russian palaces, catching firelight in diamonds and enamel. To be opened, admired, passed from hand to hand like sacred relics of aristocratic joy. They were not just gifts, they were statements. And today, 7 of them are missing. We're talking, of course, about the Faberge eggs. Created between 1885 and 1917, these weren't the kind you dye with vinegar and a wax crayon. These were masterpieces, ornaments of absurd luxury, crafted under the eye of Peter Karl Faberge for the Russian imperial family. Commissioned by the Tsars, gifted to empresses, and each one unique, glorious, filled with secrets. Miniature trains, mechanical swans, tiny portraits, clocks, lockets, surprise after gilded surprise. They are the most opulent Easter eggs in human history, and 50 of them were made for the Romanovs. But only 43 have been found. That leaves 7 imperial Faberge eggs unaccounted for. 7 pieces of unparalleled craftsmanship, 7 fragments of a fallen dynasty. And their disappearance is a mystery wrapped in revolution, war, theft, black market whispers, and antique dealer blunders. Let's rewind. The first egg was created in 1885 for Tsarina Maria Feodorovna, wife of Tsar Alexander III. A white enamel shell, which opened to reveal a golden yolk, inside of which was a golden hen, which contained a miniature imperial crown and a ruby pendant. It was elegance stacked inside elegance, and she loved it. So every year after that, a new egg was made, and when Nicholas II took the throne, he ordered 2 each year own for his mother, 1 for his wife, Empress Alexandra. The eggs grew more intricate, more symbolic, a showcase of Russia's imperial confidence, right up until the moment the empire collapsed. Then came 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. The Romanovs were imprisoned, then executed, and their treasures looted, seized, catalogued by the Soviet government, packed away in crates, shoved into vaults. Some were sold off during the 1920s and 30s to raise foreign currency. Others simply vanished into the chaos of war. That's where the trail splits. Some of the eggs were snapped up by Western collectors. Armand Hammer, the American industrialist and friend of Lenin, helped ferry dozens of Russian artifacts out of the country. Malcolm Forbes later became the most famous Faberge collector of the 20th century. Museums followed. Auctions turned eggs into 7- and 8-figure commodities. But not all were accounted for. The missing 7 include hen with sapphire pendant, 1886, the second imperial egg, presumed lost. Its design is known only from documents. Cherub with chariot, 1888, vanished without a trace. Necessaire egg, 1889, only known from an archival inventory. Royal Danish egg, 1903, a tribute to Maria Feodorovna's Danish heritage, never found. Alexander III commemorative egg, 1909, lost after the Revolution. Napoleon egg, 1912, designed to commemorate the centennial of the War of 1812. Lost surprise from the Caucasus egg, 1893. The egg itself survives, but its internal mechanisma mechanical elephanthus never been found. Some of these eggs may have been melted down for their gold during the Soviet era. Others might sit in dusty drawers, mislabeled, misunderstood, private hands, secret vaults, forgotten corners of European estates. In 2014, one such egg, the 1887 Third Imperial Egg, was found in a scrap metal sale in the Midwest. A man bought it, planning to melt it for parts. He Googled the name engraved inside. It turned out to be worth over $30 million. That tells you everything you need to know about how close these missing eggs are, how lost they aren't. They exist. They're out there, somewhere. And they're not just valuable because of money. They are pieces of the final act of the Romanov tragedy, personal objects, gifted in love, created with impossible care. And each one has a story carved into enamel and gemstone. The 1915 Red Cross egg, for example, has miniature portraits of nurses and a tiny folding screen. It was made during World War I, when Alexandria was leading efforts at the front. The 1916 steel military egg was stark steel and red gold, no jewels, a symbol of wartime austerity. Even luxury knew it was dying. To find one of the missing eggs is to resurrect a moment in time, to open a tiny door into a vanished world of chandeliers, snow, czars, and revolution. And maybe, just maybe, to find an 8th, a lost egg no one knew about, because Faberge made other eggs, too non-imperial, for private clients. Some of those are missing as well. The line between missing and misplaced in the Faberge world is thin, eggshell thin. Collectors still hunt, museums still hope, treasure hunters still scan auction sites for that telltale gleam. And if one shows up, it'll be a cultural earthquake, a glittering ghost of empire rising from a pawn shop shelf. But while the missing Faberge eggs are opulence incarnate, our next mystery takes us even further back, past Tsars, past Rome, past even the Maya. It's the script of a civilization that may have been the first in the Americas to write anything down. And we still can't read it. Let's crack open the enigma of the Olmec Script, and the voice of a culture that vanished before we knew its name. The Olmec Script. Before the Maya, before the Aztecs, before the Spanish came and burned it all down, there was the Olmec. They are the shadow civilization of Mesoamerica, the mother culture, the ones who built colossal heads out of volcanic stone and left them staring at the jungle sky. The ones who invented the calendar system, played ball games with cosmic stakes, and buried jaguar-masked priests beneath ceremonial mounds, and they wrote, or at least something like it. We have the evidence. We just can't read it. Welcome to one of the oldest written languages in the Americas, and one of the least understood. The Olmec civilization flourished from around 1600 to 400 BCE in what is now southern Mexico, mainly the states of Veracruz and Tabasco. They left behind vast urban centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. They shaped jade with microscopic precision. They aligned cities with astronomical points, and among the ruins, glyphs. The most famous is the Cascajal Bloca, 26-pound slab of serpentine stone covered in 62 symbols, dated to around 900 BCE. It was discovered in a pile of construction rubble in 1999 and revealed to the public in 2006. The glyphs are arranged in horizontal rows, not vertical columns like later Mesoamerican scripts. They repeat. They show signs of syntax. They're clearly intentional. And yet, they remain silent. This isn't just frustrating, it's seismic. Because if the Cascajal block is indeed a writing system, and most experts cautiously agree that it represents the earliest known writing in the Western Hemisphere, that means the Olmecs weren't just carving statues and shaping mythology, they were recording, transmitting, encoding. But what? We have no idea. The biggest problem? The evidence is scarce. One block, a handful of glyphs on pottery, stelae, and monuments. There's no library, no codices, no long text to compare, and no Rosetta Stone to match the glyphs against a known language. We're staring into a linguistic abyss. And then there's the problem of context. The Olmec didn't leave behind bilingual inscriptions. Their descendants, the Zapotecs, the Mixtecs, the Maya developed their own scripts. Some glyphs look similar. There may be continuity. But the languages changed. The meanings shifted. The Olmec script seems other, older, alien, even to their successors. Some glyphs resemble plants, others animals. Some are abstract. Are they logograms, like Chinese? Phonetic syllables, like Maya glyphs? Ideograms, like early Sumerian? We don't know. We can't even say for sure if they represent spoken language or ritual symbolism, if they told stories or if they were the story. And the debate rages. Some scholars are cautious. They argue the Cascajal block isn't writing at all, just a proto-script, symbols used for ceremonial purposes without a true linguistic system behind them. Like the Vinci symbols in Europe or the Jiahu tortoiseshells in China. Others are more bullish. They point to repetition, structure, and formatting. They say this isn't just art, it's information. Early, yes, rudimentary maybe, but still writing. And if they're right, then everything changes. Because writing is civilization's memory. It allows ideas to outlive people, empires, time. And if the Olmec wrote, they weren't just the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They were the first historians of the Americas, the first to record what they saw, what they feared, what they loved. And we lost it. Burned by time, buried by conquest, or simply never preserved in the first place. Unlike the Maya, the Olmec didn't use bark paper codices. If they did, none survived the jungle. The script is carved in stone, and stone can only hold so much. But there's hope. New finds are emerging, glyphs scratched on ceramic shards, marks on figurines. Every year, archaeologists inch closer to a pattern, a key, a breakthrough. And when it comes, it won't just be linguistic, it'll be emotional. The Olmec will speak, and when they do, it'll be like hearing the first breath of an entire continent. Until then, their voices remain locked in serpentine stone, a script without sound, a story without words. The Atlantean records, if they existed, it begins, like all good legends, with a sentence from Plato. In Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, the philosopher tells of a powerful civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, Atlantis. An island empire, rich in resources, technologically advanced, and militarily aggressive. A land that challenged Athens, and in a single day and night of misfortune, sank beneath the sea. And that was it. No other ancient Greek writer mentioned it before Plato. No archaeological site has ever been confirmed. No official chronicle of its deeds. No broken tablets. No buried cities. Just a few passages in two philosophical dialogues that scholars still argue about today. Was it allegory? A political parable about hubris? A moral fable? Or was it real? And if Atlantis was real, then so were its records. That's the core of the mystery. Not just whether Atlantis existed, but whether it left anything behind. Scrolls, inscriptions, maps, machinery, knowledge, the lost records of a drowned civilization. Because if we entertain the idea that Atlantis was more than a metaphor, we suspend our disbelief, then we must confront a tantalizing possibility. That a vast repository of ancient knowledge was buried in a cataclysm and never recovered. And that, perhaps, remnants of it still exist. Let's be clear. No Atlantean document has ever been found. No writing system attributed to Atlantis. No confirmed artifacts. But the idea of Atlantean records, whether factual or fictional, has haunted human imagination for over 2,000 years. And not just as a curiosity, as a threat. Because in Plato's telling, Atlantis was not just wealthy, it was arrogant, corrupted by power, a utopia turned imperialist. The gods punished it not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Its knowledge, its power, its pride, these were its undoing. And its loss was a warning. No civilization is unsinkable. Which makes the idea of its records all the more compelling. What if Atlantis had documented everything? Its history, its science, its philosophy, its rise and its fall. What if there was a library, like Alexandria, but older? What if that library survived? The search has taken many forms. In Egypt, some believe the Hall of Records, a mythical chamber said to lie beneath the Sphinx, or inside the Great Pyramid, holds Atlantean knowledge. This theory exploded in the 20th century thanks to mystics like Edgar Cayce, who claimed to have seen Atlantean documents in psychic visions. He described crystal-powered technology, flying machines, and a spiritual science lost to time. Mainstream archaeology scoffs. No such chamber has ever been confirmed, despite decades of speculation and ground-penetrating radar. In the Americas, some see echoes of Atlantis in the legends of sunken cities and white gods. The Maya, the Aztecs, the Incal had myths of great floods and ancestral homelands. Some point to similarities in architecture, stepped pyramids, solar alignments, and wonder. Could Atlantis have seeded the New World with its survivors? In the ocean, researchers have combed the Atlantic seabed, especially near the Azores and the Caribbean, for anomalies, submerged structures, symmetrical ridges, underwater roads off the coast of Bimini. Most are explained as natural formations, others remain suggestive. But the lack of evidence hasn't stopped belief. In fact, it's fueled it. Because the idea of Atlantis represents something we all crave. A forgotten golden age. A time when humans were wiser, kinder, more in tune with the earth and the stars. The records of such a world would be priceless. They'd be sacred. Imagine what they could contain. Advanced mathematics, star charts more accurate than medieval Europe, medicine drawn from the sea and sky, philosophical systems that fused science with spirituality, or maybe technology, machines, devices, A blueprint for a civilization that didn't conquer the world with swords, but with ideas. And maybe that's why the records remain lost if they ever existed at all. Because knowledge is power. And lost knowledge? That's potential power. Everyone wants to be the one who finds it. The scholar, the adventurer, the savior. It's a narrative so potent that entire genres science fiction, conspiracy theory, pseudo-history have built themselves around it. But the truth, if it ever comes, will be stranger. Because the real value of the Atlantean records isn't what they might contain. It's what they represent. The possibility that history is deeper than we know. That under every ruin is another layer. That our collective memory is short, and the ocean is long. And if one day, a diver swims through a crack in the seafloor and finds a chamber filled with tablets and tools and charts that don't belong to any known culture, everything changes. But until then, the records remain the greatest what if in human history. Not a proof, not a lie, a possibility. And if the Atlanteans built cities of marble and glass, the next mystery concerns one city in particular, a real one, monumental, literal, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Built to stand for eternity, it lasted only 54 years before an earthquake brought it down. And now, no one knows exactly where it stood or what it truly looked like. Next, we go searching for the towering bronze phantom of antiquity, the Colossus of Rhodes, the original Colossus of Rhodes. He stood at the harbor's mouth, they say, towering, gleaming, cast in bronze and ambition, a god in metal Helios, the sun god, rendered not in myth but in engineering. He was the Colossus of Rhodes. And though he was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, no one knows exactly what he looked like, or where he stood, or what happened to his body after he fell. This is not just a lost statue. This is a lost statement. Let's rewind. Rhodes, 3rd century BCE, a naval powerhouse, a cultural hub, a fortified island city that stood against one of the most powerful siege machines the world had ever seen. In 305 BCE, Demetrius I of Macedon attacked Rhodes with an army and a fleet, including a massive siege tower called the Helepolis. It was a brutal, grinding standoff, but Rhodes didn't fall. It repelled the assault and emerged as a symbol of Hellenistic resilience. The city celebrated its victory by building something outrageous, a statue of Helios, the protector of Rhodes, to thank the god for their survival. The construction began around 292 BCE, led by sculptor Ceres of Lindos. It took 12 years. According to ancient sources, it stood about 33 meters high, 108 feet, roughly the height of the Statue of Liberty's body, minus the pedestal. It was made of iron and stone frames, sheathed in bronze plates. Some say the bronze was repurposed from the siege weapons Demetrius left behind. And then, around 280 BCE, it was done. The Colossus was born. But here's where the mystery starts. Because unlike the pyramids or the Parthenon, there are no surviving depictions of the Colossus from the time it was standing. No detailed drawings, no inscriptions describing its pose. Everything we think we know comes from later writers often centuries removed. Was it straddling the harbor, 1 foot on each pier? Most modern scholars say no. That iconic image popularized in Renaissance art and pop culture would have been structurally insane. The engineering required to hold that pose in bronze would have defied ancient materials. More likely, he stood beside the harbor or atop a promontory, perhaps shading his eyes, a torch in one hand, like a solar sentinel. But even that's guesswork. Because in 226 BCE, just 54 years after it was completed, the Colossus fell. An earthquake hit Rhodes. The statue snapped at the knees and collapsed into ruin. And the Rhodians, consulting an oracle, decided not to rebuild it. It lay there, broken, for centuries. A ruin among ruins. Tourists came to gawk. Pliny the Elder, writing 300 years later, said even fallen, the statue was awe-inspiring, its fingers bigger than most statues. And then came the second disappearance. In 653 CE, Rhodes was invaded by Arab forces. According to Islamic chroniclers, the bronze remains of the Colossus were melted down and sold off allegedly to a Jewish merchant in Edessa who carted the metal away on 900 camels. Is that true? Who knows? It could be myth, or metaphor, or real. What we do know is that the statue is gone, every plate, every nail, every glint of sun off its surface. Gone. Which raises the next question. Where did it stand? Archaeologists and historians have debated this for centuries. Some say it stood near the entrance of Mandrake Harbor, where now 2 stone deer statues mark the piers. Others suggest it was inland, atop a hill, where it could overlook the harbor without standing directly on it. No base has ever been definitively identified. No foundation stones. Just educated guesses and topographical reconstructions. And yet, the idea of the Colossus has endured far beyond its short life. Because it wasn't just a statue, it was a projection, a message carved into skyline. We are not afraid, we are strong, we are under the protection of the sun. Rhodes was making a statement to the ancient world, the same way modern cities do with skyscrapers or Olympic stadiums. And that's why the Colossus lingers in cultural memory, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it meant. And here's the wild part. We might build it again. In recent years, there have been proposals serious one esto construct a new Colossus in Rhodes, a modern version, possibly solar-powered, a cultural center and tourist attraction. A resurrection not of the statue's exact form, but its spirit. But until then, the original Colossus remains one of history's most dramatic disappearing acts. No blueprint, no confirmed site, no fragments, just shadows in ancient texts, a god reduced to a rumor. And yet, it still holds its place among the 7 wonders, not because it endured, but because it didn't. Because something so vast, so ambitious, could fall and still be remembered. But where the Colossus was bronze and broken by earthquake, our next lost marvel was never so solid. Its mystery is one of meaning, not mass. Stones arranged in a circle, a riddle of ritual and time. Next, we kneel before the enigma of Stonehenge, the unknown purpose behind its frozen giants. The true purpose of Stonehenge. There it stands, ringed by fences and questions. On a wind-blown plain in Wiltshire, England, Stonehenge rises from the grass like a bruise in the earth's memory. 50-ton sarsens. 2-ton bluestones. A construction project started over 4,000 years ago and still not finished because the work now is understanding why it exists. It's not that we don't know how it was built. Theories abound. Sledges, ropes, wooden rollers, coordinated labor. It was hard, yes, but not impossible. Human beings have always been capable of moving mountains when the motivation is there. And the stones at Stonehenge dragged from as far as 150 miles away prove that motivation was extreme. The mystery isn't the architecture. It's the function. What was Stonehenge for? Theories sprout like weeds. An ancient calendar? A burial site? A temple to the sun? A healing center? A sound chamber? An alien landing pad if you're feeling History Channel about it? And the maddening answer might be all of the above, or none. Stonehenge wasn't built all at once. It evolved over time, centuries, even millennia. The earliest phase goes back to around 3100 BCE, a simple ditch and bank enclosure. Then came the Aubrey Hole circular pits that may have held wooden posts or stones. Then the famous sarsens and bluestones, arranged and rearranged over generations. Stonehenge wasn't a static monument. It was alive, used, modified, added to, revered. But for what purpose? Let's break it down. Theory 1. An astronomical observatory. There's no denying the solar alignments. The main axis of Stonehenge lines up almost perfectly with the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. The heel stone outside the circle marks the rising sun on the longest day of the year. That's not an accident. These were people who tracked time by stars and shadows. Stonehenge, in this theory, was a giant calendera seasonal beacon that told you when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate, when to mourn. Theory 2. A place of the dead. Excavations have revealed cremated remains, hundreds of them dating back to the site's earliest use. Most are adult males, carefully placed, some buried with grave goods. This wasn't a random burial site. It was ceremonial, sacred, perhaps even reserved for elite ancestors. In this view, Stonehenge was a necropolis, a city of the dead, built to connect the living with their ancestors through ritual and reverence. Theory 3. A healing center. This one comes from the strange draw of the blue stones transported from the Preseli Hills of Wales. Ancient people went to ridiculous lengths to bring them here. Why? Some scholars suggest they believed the stones had healing powers. Pilgrims may have come to Stonehenge the way people visit Lourdes or hot springs today hoping for a cure. Skeletal remains found nearby show signs of injury and illness. Was this the prehistoric world's mecca of medicine? Theory 4. A unification site. Mike Parker Pearson, one of Stonehenge's leading archaeologists, has proposed that it wasn't just a calendar or a cemetery, it was a monument to political unity. A symbol of cooperation across tribes, a joint project, drawing labor from across Britain, a kind of prehistoric parliament in stone. In a fractured world, this theory says, Stonehenge was built to bind. And maybe they're all right. Because cultures aren't simple, ritual isn't simple, monumental sites accrue meaning over time. Just like the Vatican is both a religious and political center, or the National Mall is both a park and a stage for history, Stonehenge may have served many functions, depending on the century, the season, or the people involved. But the ultimate mystery? It's emotional. Because standing there, in the circle, the weight of the stones pressing silence into your ears, you feel something bigger than function. You feel intention. These weren't just rocks. They were statements about mortality, cosmos, power, belonging, maybe even love. The kind of love that hauls stone across mountains to build something that will outlast the hands that touched it. And here's the twist. Stonehenge wasn't alone. All over Britain and Europe, similar circles exist. Wooden henges, smaller rings, processional avenues. Stonehenge was part of a network, a conversation in megaliths. A language of circles that we've only begun to decipher, but we'll never fully translate it. The builders left no writing, no instruction manual, just 40-ton riddles and scars in the soil. Stonehenge is a monument to what we almost understand, a structure that reflects the stars, the dead, and the yearning to mean something in a world that erases most of us. And yet, even as Stonehenge endures, another ancient marvel hides in plain sight, not carved in monoliths, but mixed in mud. A Roman recipe. Simple, forgotten, stronger than anything we can replicate today. Next, we crack the concrete mystery of the Roman Empire and how their lost formula may have been more advanced than our own. The art of Roman concrete mixing. Specifics. You're standing beneath the dome of the Pantheon in Rome. It's massive, perfectly round, 142 feet in diameter, unreinforced, nearly 2,000 years old, and still standing. Now ask yourself, how? Modern engineers marvel at it. They teach entire courses about it. They run stress tests and simulations, trying to reverse engineer its secrets. Because, here's the kicker, if we tried to rebuild the Pantheon today, with modern materials, it probably wouldn't last half as long. The Romans built monuments that endured empires, and they did it with something deceptively humble: concrete. But not just any concrete, Roman concrete, opus caementicium, a mix of volcanic ash, lime, seawater, and aggregate. It's not glamorous, it's not flashy, but it worked. It worked better than anything we have. And we lost the formula. Let that sink in. The ancient world figured out how to build structures that could survive earthquakes, floods, centuries of neglect, and we, with our skyscrapers and space probes, forgot how they did it. This isn't just about construction. It's about memory, innovation, and hubris, because Roman concrete wasn't just durable. It was alive. It changed. It adapted. It healed. Let's break it down. The Romans used different recipes for different purposes. For walls, for roads, for ports. They tailored their mix to the environment. That's lesson 1. Modern construction often uses standardized blends. The Romans didn't. They customized. Their key ingredient? Pozzolana, a fine volcanic ash found around the Bay of Naples. When mixed with lime and water, it triggered a chemical reaction that formed calcium silicate hydrate, the same stuff that gives modern Portland cement its strength. But the Roman version had a secret weapon: time. Modern concrete dries quickly. Roman concrete didn't just dry, it cured, slowly, over years, even decades, and in doing so, it grew stronger. Then there's the marine concrete. Roman seawalls, like those at Portus Cosenus or Caesarea, have survived 2,000 years of battering saltwater. Modern concrete crumbles in decades. So what made the difference? Recent studies revealed something extraordinary. Roman marine concrete reacted with seawater. The volcanic ash contained minerals like philipsite, which, when exposed to saltwater, allowed the formation of a rare mineral called aluminous tobermorite. This mineral strengthened the concrete over time. The walls didn't weaken, they self-healed. That's not metaphor. That's chemistry. The seawater caused the concrete to grow new crystals inside its cracks, effectively patching itself. Nature became part of the architecture. The structure didn't resist the environment. It worked with it. And here's where it gets tragic. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the knowledge of pozzolanic concrete slowly faded. Medieval builders didn't use it. Renaissance architects admired Roman structures, but didn't know how to replicate them. The formula vanished into dusty scrolls and forgotten ruins. When concrete made its modern comeback in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was reinvented from scratch. Portland cement became the global standard: cheap, fast, strong for a while. But it's not built to last. Most modern concrete degrades within 50 to 100 years. Rebar corrodes, cracks spread, infrastructure fails. Meanwhile, Roman aqueducts still carry water, Roman piers still stand. The dome of the Pantheon still curves toward the heavens, uncracked, unbroken. And here's the kicker: we're only now catching up. Scientists from MIT, UC Berkeley, and other institutions are studying Roman concrete with electron microscopes, X-ray diffraction, and geochemical analysis. They've identified the key components. They've begun to replicate it. Some startup companies are even trying to commercialize self-healing concrete based on Roman principles. But the process isn't perfect, because what we lack isn't just ingredients, it's intuition. Craft. Roman builders knew their materials. They worked by feel, by experience, by ritual. This was artisanal science, passed down by masters, lost not because it was flawed, but because civilization collapsed and forgot to bring the recipe. And that's the brutal lesson. It's not enough to build. You have to remember how to build, and why. Roman concrete wasn't just a mixture of minerals. It was a philosophy: strength through adaptability, endurance through patience, collaboration with nature rather than resistance to it. What else did they know that we've forgotten? Because if they could crack the code to immortal architecture 2,000 years ago, what other secrets might be hiding in their ruins? What else has time buried and ego refused to rediscover? The Pantheon is still standing. Our parking garages are collapsing. The verdict is clear. And while the Romans built their structures to last, the next mystery is built on sand, literally. A settlement, a myth, a name scribbled in Viking sagas. A place so far ahead of its time it rewrote the history of European exploration in the Americas. But the exact location? Still missing. Next, we follow the wind-worn clues to the lost Viking settlement of Vinland. The Viking settlement of Vinland, exact location. Long before Columbus, before Jamestown, before maps showed the Americas as anything more than dragons and guesswork, Vikings sailed west, past Iceland, past Greenland, to a land lush and strange. They called it Vinland, land of wine, or pasture, or meadows. The translation's fuzzy, but the meaning was clear. They found something out there, something big. The story comes from the Vinland Sagastwo medieval Icelandic texts, the Saga of the Greenlanders, and the Saga of Eric the Red, written in the 13th century, but set in the early 11th. In them, Leif Erikson of Eric the Red, himself an exiled Norse legend, sails west from Greenland and finds land, not ice, not rock, but forest, river, grapevines, land worth staying on. He wasn't the only one. The sagas tell of Thorfinn Karlsefni, who led a larger expedition to Vinland with settlers and supplies. They attempted a colony. They built houses, traded with locals, fought with locals, and eventually left. But for a brief, flickering moment, Norsemen lived in North America. And we know it happened. This isn't just myth. Because in 1960, archaeologist Helge and Anstein Ingstad discovered the remains of a Norse settlement at Lanceau Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Longhouses, iron nails, ring pins, tools. Carbon dating put it at around 1000 CE, matching the saga timeline. Boom. Confirmation. The Vikings got to North America almost 500 years before Columbus. Lanceau Meadows is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a tangible fingerprint of a medieval Norse presence across the Atlantic. But here's the catch. It's not Vinland. Not the one described in the sagas, anyway. Because the sagas speak of wild grapes none grow naturally that far north, they talk about rich meadows, mild winters, a place where crops can thrive. Lanceau Meadows is colder, harsher, more marginal. It fits the description of a way station, a base camp, not the main event. So, where was real Vinland? That's the mystery. The saga writers were vague on details, and 800-year-old directions don't exactly sync with GPS. They describe days of sailing, southward currents, coastlines with capes and fjords. One saga claims Vinland lies 2 days south of a place called Markland, believed to be modern Labrador. The math, the weather, the flora, they all suggest Vinland may have been further south. Nova Scotia? Some scholars point there. Fertile, temperate, with wild grapes, sheltered bays, a solid match for the saga descriptions. New Brunswick? Possible. It has more grape varieties than Nova Scotia, and matches the tales of lush woods and game. Maine? More radical. But the sagas describe long journeys and encounters with Scralling's likely indigenous peoples. Farther south could explain more prolonged contact and conflict. Massachusetts? A few speculative theories even push this far, suggesting the saga's mention of self-sown wheat and grapes aligns with southern New England's climate. But the further south you go, the harder the archaeology gets. Because wood rots, iron rusts, coastal erosion swallows evidence, The Norse built with turf and timber, not stone. Their camps could be erased by centuries of forest regrowth and weather. And most Norse expeditions to Vinland were short-term, seasonal. They didn't leave cities, they left impressions. And those impressions are subtle. So far, no confirmed Norse artifacts have been found outside Lonso Meadows. No longhouses, no forges, no graves, just hints, hearths, soil anomalies, possible European-style pits. Each one debated, contested, quietly hopeful. But interest is growing. New technologies, LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, satellite analysis are turning Nova Scotia and Newfoundland into archaeological hot zones. And researchers are revisiting every old clue, every saga passage, every pebble. Because finding Vinland proper would be seismic. It would rewrite early North American history, not just confirming contact, but settlement. It would prove that the Norse weren't just seafarers. They were explorers, colonizers. Participants in a global story 5 centuries ahead of schedule. And it would finally connect the dots. From the sagas, to the campfires, to the soil. Because Vinland isn't just a place. It's a promise, a lost chapter of Western exploration, a whisper in the woods. And the deeper we dig, the louder that whisper gets. But if Vinland was a spark that never quite caught fire, our next mystery is a full-blown historical blackout. A sprawling, multi-volume epic of empire, war, and identity written by one of Rome's greatest historians and mostly lost. Next, we unearth the missing books of Livy's Ab Urbe Conditand, what they could have told us about the rise and rule of Rome. The lost books of Livy. Imagine standing at the edge of a great river, wide and fast and muddy. You know it has a source. You know it runs for miles. But someone's dropped you in halfway. No map, no compass. Just half-formed banks and the roar of water. That's what reading Roman history is like without Livy's missing books. Titus Livius, known to history simply as Livy, was Rome's official memory keeper. A man born in 59 BCE, in the twilight of the Republic, and dead by 17 CE, in the dawn of the Empire. He wrote one of the most ambitious historical works of antiquity, Ab Urbe Condita, from the founding of the city. His goal? To tell the full, unbroken story of Rome, from Aeneas to Augustus, from myth to monarchy to mob rule to empire. 142 books. That's what he wrote. Today, we have 35. The rest? Gone, swallowed by time, war, decay, negligence, and the long, steady entropy of forgotten shelves. And what's missing isn't just filler, it's foundational. Let's break it down. Livy's surviving books cover Rome's legendary origins, books 110, the early Republic, and then after, a massive gap jump to the Second Punic War, books 21, 45, featuring Hannibal, Scipio Africanus, and the existential struggle against Carthage, and that's basically it. What's missing? Only the meat of the entire Roman narrative. Books 11, 20? Gone. The early expansion of the Republic, the wars with the Etruscans, the Latin League, the Samnite Wars, critical to understanding how Rome transformed from a local power into an Italian juggernaut. Books 46-70? Lost. These would have detailed Rome's rise after defeating Carthage, the conquest of Greece, the war with Antiochus, the absorption of the Hellenistic world, how Rome became more than a military machine and started shaping global culture. Books 71, 142, Oblivion. This is the part that hurts the most. These were the books that chronicled the Roman civil wars. Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Caesar, Cicero, Cleopatra. The rise of Augustus. The death of the Republic. Livy wrote it. Aland, we have none of it. Sure, we know these stories from other sources. Plutarch, Appian, Cassius Dio, Suetonius. But Livy was different. He wasn't just chronicling fact, she was crafting a narrative, a Roman epic. He was the closest thing Rome had to a national novelist. His prose was elegant, idealized, moral. He believed history was a mirror meant to reflect virtue and warn against vice. Reading Livy wasn't just reading events, it was reading Rome's soul. And that soul is now fragmented. We know the missing books existed. We have references, quotes, citations. Later historians refer to them. Some manuscripts preserve brief summaries called perioeci that outline the contents of each lost book in a sentence or two, teasers, haunting little footnotes of what we don't have. Book 91? Caesar invades Britain. Book 104? Pompey takes Syria. Book 108? Caesar crosses the Rubicon. Book 116? The Battle of Actium. And then, silence. Think about that. The most turbulent century in Roman history gone. Livy watched it all from the relative safety of Augustus's reign. He wrote not just about power, but about the cost of power. And that voiced the moderate, reflective, civic-minded voices, exactly what we don't have in our understanding of Rome's collapse and rebirth. It's like trying to understand the French Revolution without knowing who Robespierre was, or reconstructing World War II with no mention of Hitler. And here's what makes it worse. Livy's works survived well into the Middle Ages. Monks copied them, libraries housed them, but bit by bit, volume by volume, they disappeared. Fire, mold, war, theft. Simple negligence. One copy lost here, another misfiled there. Eventually, whole decades of Roman history slipped through the cracks. Could some of the missing books still exist? It's not impossible. We've rediscovered ancient texts before. Aristotle's Constitution of the Athenians turned up in an Egyptian trash heap in 1890. A lost work of Archimedes was found under a Christian prayer book. Medieval palimpsest parchments scraped and reused sometimes hide classical texts beneath layers of ink. Somewhere, in some monastery, some forgotten villa, some private collection mislabeled miscellaneous Latin writings, there could be a Livy manuscript. One page, one book. One voice pulled from the edge of extinction. And if that happens, it would be a miracle. Not just for historians, but for humanity. Because Livy wasn't writing for his time. He was writing for ours. His central question, how do you hold a republic together, is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Until then, the missing books remain a gaping wound in our historical record, a library burned, not in flame, but in apathy. And while Livy's lost words haunt us from the ashes of scrolls, the next mystery is more visual, vibrant, colorful, except you can't see it anymore. Next, we dig beneath the gray surface of the Terracotta army to reveal a lost world of ancient color-painted warriors whose true glory has faded with time. The full extent of the Terracotta army's colors. You've seen the photos, rows of silent warriors lined up in frozen formation carved from the earth, a subterranean legion buried to guard the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, in the afterlife. The Terracotta Army is one of the most iconic archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Thousands of life-size soldiers, each with unique features, hairstyles, and expressions. Awe-inspiring, yes, but incomplete. Because what you're seeing isn't what they saw in 210 BCE. The army wasn't gray, it was painted. Every soldier, infantryman, archer, charioteerance wore bright, vivid colors, reds, blues, purples, yellows. Their armor shimmered, their faces flushed with lifelike tones. Their uniforms differentiated rank, role, regiment. They didn't stand in dusty silence, they glowed in the dark of the emperor's tomb. And we lost it. Today, The terracotta army stands as a triumph of ancient artistry, but it's a ghost of its former self. The paint is mostly gone, flaked off, destroyed not by vandals or time, but by air. The moment the figures were excavated and exposed to oxygen, the ancient lacquer and pigments began to curl, crack, and disappear. In some cases, within minutes. It's one of the great ironies of archaeology. Discovery is often the beginning of destruction. Let's talk about what was there. The colors were achieved using both mineral and synthetic pigments. Vermilion for red, malachite for green, azurite for blue. But also a pigment known as Chinese purpley synthetic compound made of barium copper silicate. It's not only rare, it was one of the first synthetic pigments in the world. Developed independently in China long before synthetic colors appeared in the West. And they didn't just paint the armor, they painted the faces, blush on the cheeks, lips tinted, eyebrows inked, hairlines carefully defined, beards and mustaches painted on with precision. Even the eyes' black pupils rimmed with white, gazing into eternity. These weren't just statues, they were portraits, hyper-individualized, infused with personality. And now, that personality is gone, mostly. But not completely. Because archaeologists have found traces, tiny flakes, microscopic residues, and they've used them to reconstruct what the army might have looked like in its prime. Imagine stepping into the burial chamber, torch in hand, and being met not by rows of gray faces but by a full-color brigade, gaudy, detailed, real. And it wasn't just the soldiers. The entire necropolis spanning over 20 square miles was painted and decorated. The chariots, the horses, the acrobats, the officials. Even the roof tiles in the emperor's mausoleum may have been lacquered. This wasn't just a tomb, it was an empire, reimagined, underground, saturated with pigment and power. So what happened? It comes down to chemistry and conservation, or the lack thereof. The terracotta army was discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well. The first statues pulled from the ground still had vibrant colors. But within days, even hours, those pigments curled and crumbled. The ancient lacquerused as a base layer to bond the paint reacted with oxygen and moisture. The result? Rapid oxidation. The colors flaked off in thin, brittle shards. It was a conservationist's nightmare. No one was ready. There were no containment chambers, no rapid freeze techniques, no way to halt the decay. So now, even as new pits are excavated, archaeologists move slowly. Some figures are left buried until better preservation methods can be developed. Better to wait than to lose another layer of the past. And here's the tragedy. The loss of color isn't just cosmetic, it's cultural. It changes how we feel about the figures. When we see gray, we think solemn, stoic, lifeless. But these weren't meant to be funerary mannequins. They were meant to evoke life, military pride, political power, religious reverence. The full-color army wasn't just for show, it was symbolic. The emperor wanted to take his entire world with him, and in his world, that world was alive, teeming with hue and hierarchy. The color told a story of rank, of region, of ritual. Losing the pigment meant losing part of that story. But not all is lost. Technology is catching up. Scientists now use hyperspectral imaging, 3D scanning, and ultra-sensitive spectroscopy to detect and model the original pigments. Some reconstructions are astonishingly accurate. Museums have created full-color replicas. Visitors to the site in Xi'an can now see digital recreations, slowly bringing the lost vibrancy back to life. Still, we're only scratching the surface, because there are thousands of figures still buried. Only a fraction of the army has been unearthed. And deeper inside the tomb complex, still unexcavated, the emperor's actual mausoleum. Ancient texts say it contains rivers of mercury, palaces of bronze, a replica of the known world under a star-studded ceiling. It's never been opened. Why? Conservation, fear, the same lessons learned from the lost colors. Open it too soon, and the treasures inside, whatever they are, might disintegrate before our eyes. So we wait. And in that waiting, the army stands. Colorless, silent, but not forgotten. The Terracotta Army is a reminder that preservation is a race against time and oxygen. That ancient people saw the world not in stone and dust, but in vivid, overwhelming, glorious color. And that, even now, history can vanish, not with fire, but with breath. Next, we journey east beyond China, beyond Empireto, a forgotten frontier of defensive ambition. A wall so massive it rivals the Great Wall of China, yet so obscure most people have never heard its name. It's time to uncover the forgotten might of the Gorgan Wall, the Great Wall of Gorgan, Iran. Stretching across the windswept plains of northeastern Iran lies one of the largest, longest, and most mysterious military fortifications in the ancient world. Nearly 200 kilometers of brick and ambition, known as the Gorgan Waller to those who built it, perhaps something far more grand, now lost to time. It's older than you think, bigger than you know, and it's been called the Red Snake for the crimson hue of its bricks, visible from the sky like a scar in the earth. But, for most people, it may as well be invisible, overshadowed by its more famous cousin in China, omitted from textbooks, forgotten by empires that rose, crumbled, and failed to explain it. So what was this wall? Who built it? And what did it guard? Let's get the scale clear first. The Gorgan Wall, also called the Alexander's Wall, in some old Texas, the second longest defensive wall in the ancient world, behind only the Great Wall of China. It runs from the Caspian Sea to the mountains of northeastern Iran, cutting through deserts, rivers, and marshlands. Roughly 195 kilometers long, 10 meters wide, over 30 fortresses spaced along its length, constructed from over 200 million fired bricks. That's not just a wall, that's an undertaking. Now, let's talk time. For decades, the wall was poorly understood. Some thought it was built by Alexander the Great, others pinned it to the Parthians. But radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy have revealed the truth. The Gorgan Wall was most likely built by the Sasanian Empire around the 5th or 6th century CE. This was an age of clash Sasanians versus the Hephthalites, nomadic invaders from Central Asia. The wall wasn't a decorative border. It was a front line, a buffer. A massive, militarized edge of civilization, designed to hold back wave after wave of raids from the north. And yet, the logistics? Mind-bending. The wall includes over 30 garrisons barracks, towers, supply depots. This wasn't a quick fix. It was a coordinated campaign of labor, planning, and resource distribution. A logistical miracle in the harshest terrain. Engineers built canals to channel water along its length, both to support brick kilns and supply troops. They adjusted the wall's path to follow natural topography. They mixed a desert clay and water, fired it in hundreds of kilns, and turned it into an imperial spine. And then it was abandoned. That's the mystery. Despite its staggering size and strategic purpose, the Gorgan Wall appears to have been used for only a limited period. Then, silence, disuse, collapse into obscurity. Why? Did the Sasanian Empire shift its focus? Did the threat recede? Was the wall breached? Or was it simply too expensive to maintain? The sources are quiet. In fact, one of the strangest things about the Gorgan Wall is that almost no written records describe it in detail. We have mentions, glimpses. Some scholars think it's the Wall of Gorgan, described by Islamic historians in the 9th and 10th centuries. Others link it to the semi-mythical Gates of Alexander, a legendary barrier said to hold back the tribes of Gog and Magog. But none of those accounts explain the full story. None of them capture the sheer scale, the discipline, the desperation, because that's what this wall was, a last stand in bricks, a red line in the sand. It's not just a military marvel, it's a symbol. Of what? Control, border, civilization. The eternal struggle between the settled and the nomadic. The belief that, with enough stone and will, you can keep chaos at bay. That walls don't just hold enemies back, they hold identity in. And here's the kicker. We're only just beginning to study it properly. For centuries, the wall was ignored by archaeologists, by governments, by locals, buried under modern agriculture, eroded by sand and time. But in the last few decades, new technologies have revealed its secrets. Remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery. What they're finding is astonishing. Complex gatehouses, evidence of mass troop movements, watchtowers with line-of-sight visibility from one to the next. A communication system? Maybe. And near-perfect spacing between forts, suggesting high-level coordination and measurement techniques. This wasn't a haphazard barrier, it was planned to the inch. And yet, most people have never heard of it. The Great Wall of China gets all the press. The Roman limes are well documented. But the Gorgan Wall? It's the greatest feat of ancient military engineering you probably never learned about. And that's the tragedy. Because history remembers winners. It forgets the edges, the peripheries, the places that tried and failed to keep the dark out. The Gorgan Wall is a ghost of strategy, a remnant of a worldview that drew lines and dared the world to cross them. And when the world did, the wall crumbled and took its builders' names with it. But while the Gorgan Wall holds its secrets in stone and silence, our next mystery lies in bone. Skulls, stretched, sculpted, distorted into impossible shapes. Were they fashion statements, medical experiments, signs of nobility? Or were they something else entirely? Next, we unearth the true story and wild speculations surrounding the Paracas Skulls of Peru. The Paracas Skulls' true story. They are elongated, alien-like, massive. The Paracas Skulls, dug from the desert coast of Peru, look like props from a science fiction film or evidence, according to the fringe corners of the internet, that extraterrestrials once walked among us. But set the conspiracies aside, because the real story is stranger, darker, more human, and still not entirely solved. Discovered in the 1920s by Peruvian archaeologist Julio Citello, the Paracas skulls come from a necropolis near the Paracas Peninsula, over 300 of them, some dating back to 700 BCE. They are among the most dramatic examples of cranial modification in human history. But here's the mystery. Why? Because these skulls weren't just long, they were reshaped, intentionally, over time, in life. Let's talk method. The process is called cranial deformation, and it's been practiced by many cultures across the world: Africa, Europe, Asia, the Americas. In Paracas, it started in infancy. Boards, cloth bindings, or pads were used to apply constant pressure to a baby's still soft skull. Over months, the bones would shift and grow into a new, shape-conical, flat, elongated. The result? A skull that defies modern expectations. High, sloping forehead, extended cranium. It looks non-human, but it's entirely human-made. This wasn't brain surgery. It didn't involve cutting or puncturing. And in most cases, it didn't damage cognitive function. People lived full lives with these reshaped heads. But that doesn't answer the core question. Why do it at all? Here's where things fracture. Theory 1. Social status. Most scholars believe cranial deformation was a mark of elite identity, a sign of nobility. You weren't born with a long head, you earned it. Or rather, your parents did, by binding your skull from birth. The longer the head, the higher the class. Evidence supports this. Paracas skulls are often found in elite tombs, wrapped in fine textiles, buried with precious artifacts. The association between modified craniums and social power is clear. Theory 2. Cultural identity. Skull shaping might have marked membership in a tribe, lineage, or priesthood, a visible, inescapable symbol of belonging. Just as modern cultures use tattoos, scarification, or piercings, the Paracas may have used the skull itself as a canvas. Theory 3. Aesthetic preference. Beauty standards differ across cultures and times. In Paracas, the elongated skull may have been considered attractive, divine even. Many statues and figures from the region show gods or ancestors with similarly shaped heads. But then, things get complicated. Some researchers noticed that the Paracas skulls weren't just shaped differently. They seemed to have different structures altogether. Thicker bone, larger cranial volume, different suture patterns, especially the absence or modification of the sagittal suture, which divides the parietal bones. Cue the chaos. This is where fringe theories burst through the wall. Ancient aliens, non-human hybrids, lost races with hidden DNA. You've seen the documentaries. You've heard the voice. What if they weren't human? Let's be clear. There's no credible evidence that the Paracas skulls belong to anything other than Homo sapiens. Most of the anatomical differences can be explained by natural variation, post-mortem damage, or misunderstandings of cranial morphology. But that doesn't mean everything is understood. Genetic studies of the Paracas remains have yielded mixed results. Some early DNA analyses published outside peer-reviewed journals suggested unusual haplogroups, potentially non-local lineages. Later studies countered this, arguing the DNA fits within the normal range of ancient Andean populations. The truth is, the data is sparse. Ancient DNA degrades in desert conditions. Contamination is a constant risk. And without large-scale, published, peer-reviewed sequencing, we're left in the dark. But there's another layer to this mystery, one that has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with silence. Because after Tello's discoveries, the Paracas culture was mostly overshadowed by the Nazca, whose lines captured global attention, by the Inca, whose empire wrote the later chapters, by colonial narratives that dismissed pre-Columbian cultures as footnotes. And yet, the Paracas were innovators. They created some of the most intricate textiles in ancient history find, multicolored weaves with symbolic complexity rivaling Egyptian or Chinese silkwork. They practiced advanced surgical techniquestrepanation, or skull drilling, with some evidence of survival. They built underground burial galleries, designed to protect the dead from sand and time. They weren't just the people with weird skulls. They were architects of a worldview that saw the body itself, the skullas, a vessel of transformation. Identity wasn't something you were born with. It was something shaped, molded, earned. And maybe that's the real lesson. Because in Paracas, your head didn't just hold your brain, it held your status, your spirit, your story. And when we look at those skulls now, we're not just seeing bone, we're seeing intention, design, philosophy. But what exactly they believed? That's gone. No written language survives from the Paracas, no codices, no translations, just bone and thread and silence. And maybe, buried under a collapsed tomb or sealed in a forgotten cave, there's a textile or artifact or mural that explains it all. That breaks the code. Until then, we're left staring into the elongated eyes of the dead, wondering what they saw when they looked at the stars. But while the Paracas shaped the human head, our next mystery is about the mind locked inside symbols no one has cracked. It's the script of one of the world's oldest urban civilizations, written everywhere, read by no one. Next, we attempt to decode the silent script of the Indus Valley Civilization and the language that vanished with it. The language of the Indus Valley Civilization. They built cities before Rome was a rumor, before Babylon had a skyline. While Egypt was still experimenting with pyramids, the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, was engineering entire urban landscapes across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. This was no fringe culture, no scattered tribe. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley flourished as one of the four great cradles of civilization, alongside Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. It covered more territory than either Mesopotamia or Egypt. It boasted cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, with grid-patterned streets, sewage systems, public baths, and multi-story homes. It was orderly, sophisticated, clean, and completely unreadable. Because here's the kicker. They had a script. We found it. Hundreds of inscriptions, etched on seals, tablets, pottery, and tools. Over 4,000 individual pieces have been discovered. The symbols are real. The pattern is real. It is clearly a form of writing, but no one can read it. The Indus script is one of the greatest linguistic mysteries in human history. Let's start with what we know. The script consists of short sequences, rarely more than 5 characters long. It appears on square seals, often accompanied by animal motifs. Unicorns, yes, unicorns, bulls, elephants, tigers. The writing is clean, compact, systematic. Some symbols repeat. There are about 400 distinct signs, though only around 100 are common. It's not decorative, it's intentional, and it's everywhere. But that's where the knowledge ends and the mystery begins. We don't know what language the Harappans spoke. We don't know if the script was phonetic, like an alphabet, logographic, like Chinese, syllabic, like Japanese kana, or something else entirely. And without a Rosetta Stone, without a bilingual inscription, it's impossible to assign values to the symbols. And so we're left with questions. Was it a written language at all? Some skeptics argue the script might not represent full linguistic content, that it's a system of proto-writing or symbolic notation used for trade, ownership, or religious purposes, but not to convey complex thoughts. But most scholars reject this. The inscriptions are too consistent, too patterned, too universal across a massive region. They appear on standardized seals used in administration and trade. This wasn't tribal graffiti. This was a system. What language family did it belong to? That's the next puzzle. Some scholars suggest Dravidian roots, the linguistic ancestors of Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada. Others argue for a connection to early Indo-Aryan or Munda languages. But without knowing the sounds behind the signs, it's like trying to hear music by staring at sheet music in a foreign notation system. Have we made progress? Sort of. Computational linguistics has helped. Researchers have used statistical models to analyze the sequence and frequency of symbols. Patterns have emerged. Some symbols function like grammatical markers. Others pair or cluster, suggesting syntax. One 2009 study found that the script had entropy levels comparable to known languages, meaning it behaved like real writing. But decoding it? That's still a wall. Because every attempt at translation dozens have been proposed hits the same dead end. No bilingual texts, no long passages, just fragment after fragment. And many of those fragments are tied to a trade and religious context we no longer understand. We don't know what they believed. We don't know how they buried their dead. We don't know who ruled, or if they had rulers at all. The Indus Valley civilization left behind no palaces, no monuments, no king lists, no epic poems, just the cities and the script. And it's not just the writing that vanished. So did the civilization itself. Around 1000, 900 BCE, the Harappan world began to fade. Slowly, not with war, but with withdrawal. The cities emptied, trade routes collapsed, the seals stopped appearing. Environmental change, drought, shifting rivers, epidemics. No one's certain. But by 1300 BCE, the cities were dead. And with them, their language. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where religious institutions preserved writing through priests and scribes, the Harappans left no institutional continuity. Their knowledge didn't pass into the next empire. It just ended. And what's left? An entire civilization in mute. The paradox of the Indus script is that it is visible, not hidden, not buried in myth or fable. We have it, in museum cases, in photos, in excavation reports. We can touch it, trace it, but we can't hear it. It's like having a locked diary of a vanished friend. You know their name, you see their face, but their words are sealed. And yet, the script calls to us. Because if we crack it, if we find the key, it won't just be a linguistic triumph. It will open a world. We'll learn what the Harappans called themselves, how they traded, what they prayed to, what they feared, what they hoped for. We'll bridge a silence that has lasted for 4,000 years. And the next step might come from anywhere. A new seal, a bilingual inscription, a breakthrough in AI pattern recognition, the right question asked at the right time. Until then, the Indus script is a puzzle with all the pieces, just no way to snap them together. But while the Harappans wrote on seals and vanished into dust, the next mystery is a wonder that may never have existed at all. Or did it? Described in ancient texts, rebuilt in dreams, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, floating paradise, or historical hallucination? Next, we ascend into the myth and mystery of one of the ancient world's most debated marvels, the exact appearance of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a garden that defies gravity, terraces rising into the sky, trees perched on columns, water cascading like silk down sun-drenched stone. A man-made mountain of lush greenery in the heart of the desert Babylon, jewel of Mesopotamia. And yet, there's a problem. We don't know if it existed. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the only wonder of the ancient world, for which no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found. No ruins, no inscriptions, no Babylonian records that even mention them. And Babylon, the real city, the capital of multiple empirae, has been dug, mapped, measured. So what are we left with? Descriptions, dreams, discrepancies. Let's rewind. The most vivid accounts of the gardens come not from the Babylonians themselves, but from Greek historians, especially Strabo and Philo of Byzantium. They describe a massive, multi-tiered structure of stone platforms, each level covered in soil thick enough to support large trees. Walkways wound through orchards and palms. Water was drawn from the Euphrates River by a complex system, possibly a chain pump or a spiral screw. The purpose? Romance. The most famous version of the story says King Nebuchadnezzar II, who reigned from 605 to 562 BCE, built the gardens for his wife, Amytis of Media. She missed the green mountains of her homeland, so the king created an artificial paradise in the flat, dusty plains of Mesopotamia. That's the version that has survived, the image carved into our cultural memory, a man's devotion made botanical. But there's a catch. The Babylonian records, we do have many of them, speak in detail about Nebuchadnezzar's building projects, walls, temples, palaces. His inscriptions brag about his achievements. But none mention the Hanging Gardens, not even once. You'd think something as monumental as a terraced garden mountain with a mechanical irrigation system would merit at least a sentence. But there's silence. And that's where the theories start. Theory 1. It did exist in Babylon and we just haven't found it. Babylon is huge. Much of it is unexcavated or was disturbed by looters and time. The gardens may have been part of a royal complex now lost beneath layers of silt or modern development. Some scholars argue that the lack of direct evidence doesn't mean non-existence, just that we haven't looked in the right place yet. But that feels unlikely. Babylon has been explored for over a century. We found Ishtar Gate. We found the massive palace complex. We found the ziggurat base that some believe inspired the Tower of Babel legend, but no gardens. Theory 2. The Greeks got it wrong or invented it. It wouldn't be the first time. Greek historians often romanticize foreign lands. Herodotus, the father of history, was also the father of embellishment. If the Greeks heard stories of Babylonian opulence and ingenuity, they might have constructed a metaphora hanging garden of wonder and wealth, even if the actual garden was something simpler, a poetic exaggeration. Theory 3. The Hanging Gardens existed but in Nineveh, not Babylon. This is where things get interesting. In the 1990s, Assyriologist Stephanie Dalley proposed a radical theory. The Hanging Gardens weren't in Babylon at all, but in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, built by King Sennacherib, reigned 704–681 BCE. Sennacherib left inscriptions describing an elaborate garden watered by aqueducts and a hydraulic screw centuries before Archimedes supposedly invented the device. His palace at Nineveh included lush courtyards, artificial hills, and irrigation systems powered by what he called a wonder for all peoples. In 2013, a massive aqueduct system was discovered, leading from the mountains to Nineveh, of the most sophisticated waterworks of the ancient world. Dalley argues that over time, the Greeks confused Babylon with Nineveh. After all, both cities were huge. Both were in Mesopotamia. And by the time Greek writers were recording these stories, both cities were already ruins. Confusion was inevitable. If she's right, the gardens were real but their address was wrong. A 600-mile mistake. Still, many scholars remain skeptical. The evidence from Nineveh, while compelling, doesn't perfectly match the Greek descriptions. There are no definitive ruins of tiered gardens, no giant waterfalls, and no concrete proof. Which brings us back to square one. The Hanging Gardens are a Schrodinger's wonder, both real and imaginary. They exist vividly in texts and art, but not in stone. They bloom in the pages of history, but wither under the archaeologist's brush. And yet, they endure. Because the idea of the gardens is as powerful as the structure would have been. A green paradise rising in the desert, a marvel of engineering and emotion, a king's love expressed in architecture. It speaks to something deep in human nature, the desire to shape our environment, to conquer nature not with violence, but with beauty. Maybe that's why the story won't die. Because it's not just about plants or pumps. It's about longing, memory, the past we wish had been real. And maybe, just maybe, the ruins are still out there. Beneath Nineveh, beneath Babylon, beneath belief. Waiting for the right eye to see them. But while the Hanging Gardens remain a puzzle of water and wonder, the next mystery is one of myth and migration. A city whispered about in Aztec legend, a homeland across the desert, a place of origin no one can find. Next, we follow the vanished footprints to Aztlan, the lost city that gave birth to an empire. The lost city of Aztlan. To understand Aztlan, you have to listen not just to words, but to echoes. Ancient chants, oral memory, myths passed from mouth to mouth until they become more than history, they become identity. The Aztecs called themselves the Mexica. That's what they were before they were conquerors. Before Tenochtitlan rose from the lake and the Spanish burned it down. They were wanderers, pilgrims, chosen. And they believed they came from a place of great beauty, a sacred homeland. They called it Aztlan. Aztlan is the cradle of the Aztec people, their original home. the place where the god Huitzilopochtli first spoke to them, commanding them to leave, to travel, to seek a new land marked by an eagle devouring a snake on a cactus. That land would become Mexico. But Aztlan came first. And here's the problem. We don't know where it is. Not just figuratively, literally. There is no confirmed archaeological site, no ruins, no coordinates. Aztlan is a blank spot on the map, a word hovering between metaphor and reality. So what was it? A real place? A spiritual idea? Both? Let's start with the basics. The earliest references to Aztlan come from Nahuatl language texts written after the Spanish conquest. These include the Codex Boturini, the Codex Aubin, and the Historia de los Mexicanos por sus pinturas. They tell of a northern island, yes, an island surrounded by water, lush and fertile, where the ancestors of the Mexica lived in peace before embarking on their migration south. They left Aztlan under divine command, journeying for generations. The path took them through deserts, valleys, mountains. Along the way, they split into tribes. Some stayed behind. Others pushed onward. They became the Nahua peoples Toltecs, Tepanecs, Chichimecs, and eventually the Aztecs. The story is consistent across sources, but the location? That's where everything falls apart. Theory 1. Aztlan was in northern Mexico. This is the most widely held view. The Aztecs described Aztlan as being far to the north. Some scholars suggest it could be somewhere in the modern states of Nayarit, Durango, or Zacatecas. These regions have ancient settlements, cave paintings, desert cultures, but nothing definitively Aztec. Theory 2. Aztlan was in the southwestern United States. Some historians push the boundaries further north, into Arizona, New Mexico, even Utah. The Hopi, Zuni, and Pueblo cultures share symbolic and mythological overlaps with Mesoamerican traditions. Could Aztlan have been part of this cultural web? A migration from the American Southwest into central Mexico? Theory 3. Aztlan was mythological. Not a place at all, but a metaphor. A concept of origin. A symbolic paradise, like Eden or Atlantis. Aztlan might represent a spiritual state, not a GPS coordinate. The place of the herons, as the name roughly translates, could be an allegory for prehistory, the time before time, a lost innocence. And yet, the Aztecs believed in it. They marked their calendars from the year of departure. They recited its story in rituals. They drew it in Codicessan Island with 7 caves, symbolizing the 7 Nahua tribes who left it. The Chico Mostocte, place of the 7 caves, is often linked with Aztlan. It's where humanity was born, according to Nahua cosmology. Some depictions even show the caves emerging from a single mountain, echoing symbols found in Aztec temples. So what are we looking for? An island? A mountain? A cave? A desert? No wonder archaeologists haven't found it. But maybe the search is flawed, because the Mexica didn't discover Mexico. They created it. Their myth gave meaning to their conquest. Their pilgrimage from Aztlan wasn't just a road trip, it was an origin story. Every step south was sacred. Every encampment was a verse in a living epic. And when they finally reached Lake Texcoco and saw the eagle on the cactus, they didn't just settle. They planted a legend. Tenochtitlan was Aztlan reborn, the homeland resurrected by faith and fire. A memory turned into empire. And this is where it gets chilling. The Spanish knew the myth, and they used it. After the conquest, they allowed the story of Aztlan to persist. Why? Because it made the Aztecs seem like intruders too. It painted them as migrants, foreigners who had displaced earlier, more legitimate peoples. The Spanish positioned themselves as just another wave in the tide of history. The myth was weaponized, which makes the search for Aztlan not just archaeological, but political, cultural, emotional. For Chicano activists in the 20th century, Aztlan became more than a myth. It became a symbol of identity. Aztlan was the ancestral homeland of the Mexican-American people. Not somewhere out there, but right here, in the Southwest, in California, in New Mexico. It became a rallying cry for rights, heritage, and history. We didn't cross the border, they said. The border crossed us. So Aztlan, paradoxically, has been found not in ruins, but in rhetoric. And maybe that's what it always was. A shapeshifter, a mirror, a homeland that lives in the mind, not the map. But that doesn't mean we'll stop searching. Somewhere in the desert, under layers of time, there might still be a cave, a shard, a glyph, a doorway. And when it opens, it will not just connect us to the Aztecs, it will connect us to the moment when myth became direction, when belief became movement. But if Aztlan was the beginning of an empire, our next mystery is about a different beginning. Older, stranger, a prelude to America that challenges everything we thought we knew about who got here first. Next, we dig beneath the Clovis horizon to uncover the prehistory that predates history, the enigma of the Pre-Clovis Cultures. The Pre-Clovis Cultures' full narrative. For decades, the story of the first Americans was neatly packaged, taught with the confidence of a textbook map. It went like this. During the last ice age, around 13,000 years ago, a group of hunters crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into Alaska. They followed herds of mammoths and bison through an ice-free corridor into the heart of North America. They spread southward, carrying a distinct toolkit fluted spear points known as Clovis points, and became the first human inhabitants of the Americas. It was a clean story, a satisfying origin myth backed by hard artifacts. The Clovis culture was long considered the first culture of the New World. But, like all neat historical packages, it was a lie of omission. Because as early as the mid-20th century, cracks began to form in the Clovis first model. Archaeologists began to find sites that didn't fit the narrative older sites, deeper strata, stranger tools, clues that someone was here before the Clovis people. Welcome to the shadow world of Pre-Clovis cultures, an entire lost history of human presence in the Americas, longer, more complex, and far more controversial than anyone expected. Let's start with the artifact that first shook the ground, Monte Verde, in southern Chile. Discovered in the 1970s and dated to around 14,500 years ago, Monte Verde is a game changer. It includes hearths, wooden structures, simple tools, and preserved plant remains, all pointing to a stable, sedentary community. This site is at least 1,000 years older than any known Clovis site, and it's in South America, not the North, which means those people didn't just cross into Alaska and wait, they moved fast. Monte Verde cracked the Clovis Dam, and once the flood started, there was no stopping it. In Pennsylvania, the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter produced evidence of human activity dated to nearly 16,000 years ago, though the dates remain controversial. In Texas, the Buttermilk Creek Complex, near the Galt site, revealed stone tools beneath Clovis layer evidence of human activity 15,500 years ago. In Florida, the Page Latson site showed butchered mastodon bones and stone tools beneath a peat layer dated to 14,500 years ago. Even in Alaska and Yukon, ironically, the traditional Clovis starting point archaeologists have uncovered human campsites that may date to over 16,000 years ago. And then there's Cactus Hill in Virginia, Deborah L. Friedkin in Texas, and Bluefish Caves in Canada, each one older than Clovis. Each one raising the same uncomfortable question: who were these people? Because they didn't leave a single, unified toolkit like Clovis. They left fragments, local traditions, variations in toolmaking. Some used blades, others scrapers. Some hunted big game, others foraged and fished. They weren't one group. They were many, diverse, adaptable, and very, very old. So where did they come from? The Bering Land Bridge is still the primary candidate. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today, exposing a massive landmass Beringia connecting Siberia to Alaska. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a continent, a refuge where humans may have lived for thousands of years, genetically isolated from other populations. But the classic ice-free corridor theory that people move south through a narrow gap between glaciers has been largely debunked. That corridor likely wasn't habitable until after Clovis was already spreading, which means the first Americans came by another route, most likely the coast. This brings us to the Kelp Highway hypothesis. This theory suggests that early migrants followed the Pacific coastline, using boats or shoreline paths, exploiting rich marine ecosystems along the way. Think fish, shellfish, seaweed-knot mammoths, and mastodons. This would explain why the earliest sites appear far to the South Chile, Florida, Texas well before the interior opened up. The catch? Rising sea levels. Since the Ice Age, global sea levels have risen over 120 meters, submerging the prehistoric coastline. If early humans were hugging the shore, their camps are now underwater beyond the reach of most archaeological tools. This makes the pre-Clovis story incredibly hard to tell. It's like reading a book with half the pages torn out and the rest sunk under the ocean. But there's another layer to this mystery: genetics. Modern DNA analysis tells us that all indigenous peoples of the Americas descend from a single founding population, likely from Siberia, who arrived at least 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. But the story isn't simple. There were at least 3 major waves of migration, with some populations, like the Paleo-Eskimos and the Na-Den speakers, arriving much later. Even more surprising, some ancient remains show genetic signatures that don't match any modern indigenous group. The Spirit Cave mummy in Nevada, for instance, is over 10,000 years old and doesn't fit neatly into existing lineages. And then there's Luzia, a 11,500-year-old skull found in Brazil, with cranial features more similar to indigenous Australians than modern Native Americans. Her discovery sparked theories of multiple waves of migration, possibly even from across the Pacific or Atlantic. Controversial? Absolutely. But the deeper we dig, the more it becomes clear. The peopling of the Americas was not a single event, it was a process. Long, complex, layered, erased and overwritten by time, climate, and conquest. And that conquest, the European one, obliterated what little memory remained: oral histories, sacred sites, cultural transmission, all decimated. Which means the pre-Clovis story isn't just hard to uncover. It was deliberately erased. But the bones remain. The tools, the sediments, the pollen, the clues, and with every decade the timeline gets pushed back 14,000 years, 16,000. Some scientists whisper about 30,000 years ago, pointing to tools found in Mexico's Zacatecas cave and Brazil's Toca de Tirapaya. Are they real? Are they hoaxes? We don't know. Yet. But this much is certain. The Clovis, first model, is dead. The Americas were peopled long before the mammoth hunters fluted their first spear point. And the people who did it? They weren't chasing game. They were exploring, settling, surviving. They were the original Americans. And their story is still being written, one dig, one carbon date, one broken blade at a time. But while pre-Clovis cultures challenge our ideas of migration, the next mystery challenges our sense of catastrophe. A fire, a city, a myth, and an emperor whose fiddle is more famous than the truth. Next, we investigate the true cause of the Great Fire of Rome and the legends it left in its ashes. The Great Fire of Rome's true cause. It began on the night of the 18th of July, 64 CE, a hot summer evening, dry and still. Somewhere in the tightly packed wooden buildings near the Circus Maximus, a flame caught. Maybe in a shop. Maybe a kitchen. Maybe something more sinister. Within hours, the fire exploded into an inferno. The Great Fire of Rome had begun. And for 9 days, the capital of the greatest empire in the ancient world was consumed by chaos, heat, and fear. When it was over, 2/3 of Rome lay in ruins. But that's not what people remember. They remember the image, Nero, the emperor, standing on a balcony, playing his fiddle as the city burns beneath him. It's iconic, it's cinematic, and it's probably false. The fiddle didn't exist, it wouldn't be invented for over 1,000 years. If Nero played anything, it was the lyre, and even that's doubtful. Most sources suggest he wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He was in Antium, his coastal villa, some 35 miles away. He returned as the city burned, opened his palace to refugees, organized relief, and paid for rebuilding efforts. So why the legend? Because Nero needed a scapegoat, and then, so did history. Let's back up. The Great Fire of Rome was a turning point, not just for the city, but for Nero's reign. Rome was already a pressure cooker: social tension, political unrest, deep divides between the elite and the poor. The city was a tinderbox in every sense of the word. And physically? It was a disaster waiting to happen. Most Roman buildings were made of wood and brick. Narrow alleys, overhanging eaves, flammable shops jammed into every corner, open flames for light and cooking, poor sanitation. No central fire department. Once the fire began, it had all the fuel it needed. For 6 days, it burned uncontrolled. It destroyed mansions and slums alike, temples, warehouses, markets, the ancient forum, the Palatine Hill. When the flames finally died down, only 4 of Rome's 14 districts were untouched. 3 were completely obliterated. And then, just as the city tried to recover, the fire flared, again possibly reignited, possibly a new outbreak. More buildings collapsed, more panic spread. People needed answers, fast. So who was to blame? Theory 1. It was an accident. The most plausible explanation is also the simplest. A small fire grew into a catastrophe because Rome, at that time, was a fire trap. Sparks flew. Winds spread embers. Poor urban planning did the rest. This is supported by Roman historian Tacitus, who said, "The fire began among shops containing flammable goods." Theory 2. Nero did it. Ancient sources were suspicious. Suetonius and Cassius Dio claim that Nero started the fire to clear land for his grand building project, specifically the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This palace complex would eventually sprawl across more than 100 acres of prime downtown Rome, complete with a man-made lake, gilded walls, and a colossal statue of himself. The fire, they suggested, was the ultimate urban redevelopment scheme. A blank slate burned into existence. But Tacitus, writing closest to the event, was more cautious. He said that no one knew whether the fire was accidental or malicious. He also noted that Nero did organize relief efforts, slashed the price of grain, and provided emergency housing. Still, the rumor persisted. Nero was theatrical, narcissistic, a patron of the arts who fancied himself a poet, actor, and god. His enemies painted him as unhinged. The idea of him singing while the city burned stuck, whether or not it happened. Theory 3. Christians were framed. Here's where the story darkens. To deflect suspicion, Nero accused a little-known sect of religious fanatics, the Christians. At the time, they were a tiny minority, often confused with Jews. They refused to worship the Roman gods. They met in secret. They talked about apocalypses and fire and judgment. They were easy targets. Nero blamed Themand, launched one of the earliest Christian persecutions in history. Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed in grotesque public spectacles. Some were torn apart by dogs, others crucified. Still others set on fire and used as living torches to light Nero's gardens at night. Tacitus, no fan of Christians, still called the punishment an example of cruelty rather than justice. But the damage was done. Christianity now had its first martyrs, and Nero had cemented his legacy as a madman. So what really caused the fire? We'll probably never know for sure, but modern historians lean toward the accident theory. Urban fires were common in ancient cities. Rome had suffered smaller ones before. The scale of this one was exceptional, but not inexplicable. What is clear is how the fire transformed Rome. Nero used the devastation as a launchpad for his grand architectural vision. He issued new building codes, wider streets, fire-resistant materials, limits on building heights. He reimagined Rome not just as a city of politics and power, but of spectacle and scale. His golden house was a monument to decadence, with halls of rotating ceilings and perfume mists, a palace fit for a demigod. But it also became his undoing. The people resented the extravagance. The Senate feared his ambition. His own guards turned on him within 4 years of the fire. In 68 CE, facing revolt, Nero fled the city and committed suicide. His last words, reportedly, were, "What an artist dies in me." The Great Fire didn't just destroy a city, it destroyed an emperor. And yet, the myth remains. The fiddling Nero, the burning Rome, the whisper that power corrupts, and that some men would rather watch the world burn than admit they lit the match. But while the fire consumed Rome's past, our next mystery concerns a different kind of loss, a visual one. A whole genre of beauty, an art form praised by poets and kings. Next, we search for the lost masterpieces of ancient Greek painting and the colors and canvases that time has erased. The original masterpieces of Greek painting. We know the Greeks could paint. In fact, by the time the Parthenon was rising and Plato was still a glimmer in his father's eye, Greek painters were already being ranked alongside poets and philosophers. They had names, fame, patronage. They were celebrated, commemorated, envied. Their work was discussed in the same breath as Homer's verses or Phidias's statues. And yet, today, we have almost nothing. No grand frescoes, no monumental canvases, no preserved panels bearing the signature of Apelles, Zeuxis, or Paracas names that, in antiquity, carried as much artistic weight as Da Vinci or Michelangelo would millennia later. This is the story of an art form lost not to obscurity, but to time's most cruel theft, total erasure. It's difficult to overstate how respected painting was in the ancient Greek world. The Greeks themselves considered it the pinnacle of visual art. Yes, their sculptures are what fill museums now. Their temples, their columns, their marble perfection, that's what we think of when we imagine classical art. But in antiquity, painting wasn't just equal to sculpturate, often surpassed it in prestige. Consider this. Apelles, court painter to Alexander the Great, was more famous in his time than any sculptor. His technique, his control of light and form, his naturalism were legendary. Pliny the Elder wrote that Apelles surpassed all other painters who either preceded or succeeded him. He was said to have painted Alexander with such vivid realism that even the emperor felt humbled. But where is this painting now? Gone. So is Zeuxis, who supposedly painted a cluster of grapes so realistic that birds flew down to peck at them, or Paracas, who rivaled Zeuxis in a famous competition. Zeuxis, the story goes, unveiled his grapes and tricked the birds, but Paracas? He unveiled a painting of a curtain so convincing that Zeuxis tried to pull it aside. Paracas has deceived me, he admitted. This isn't just artistic folklore. These stories reflect how highly developed Greek painting had become by the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. The artists mastered foreshortening, chiaroscuro, light and shadow, and spatial perspective, all techniques supposedly rediscovered in the Renaissance. The Greeks had already played with them, perfected them, and lost them. What little survives today isn't even on the right medium. Greek pottery, while beautiful and often sophisticated, wasn't where the masters painted their finest work. The black figure and red figure techniques of amphorae and craters were art. Yes, but they were the public, mass-produced version of a much more refined tradition. The real masterpieces were painted on wooden panels, walls, and plaster. Portraits, battle scenes, landscapes, religious iconography. And this is where the tragedy hits hardest. Wood decays, plaster crumbles, colors fade. Over centuries of invasions, earthquakes, moisture, and fire, these fragile surfaces were among the first things lost. The Romans, who admired and imitated Greek art, preserved some echoes. Their wall paintings, especially those at Pompeii and Herculaneum, give us clues. Scenes of gods, still lifes, illusionistic architecture. Many of these were copied from Greek originals. Some Roman villas even credited the Greek painters whose work inspired their frescoes. But copies aren't the same. A shadow is not a sculpture. The Pizza panels, discovered near Corinth in the 1930s, are among the only surviving examples of ancient Greek panel painting dated to the 6th century BCE. They're tiny, crude. Religious votive offerings painted on wood with wax and mineral pigments. The colors remained, blue, green, yellow, but they barely hint at what was lost. What's gone is the Renaissance before the Renaissance. Because by the time Greek culture was absorbed into Rome, the great names were already echoes. When the Library of Alexandria burned, when temples were looted, when monasteries whitewashed pagan walls, they weren't just erasing history, they were scrubbing out vision, artistic vision. And perhaps most chilling of all, we know their techniques were better than we imagined. Recent studies of Roman-era paintings using X-ray fluorescence and pigment analysis show an astonishing range of materials. Ground lapis lazuli, Egyptian blue, imported ochres, binders mixed from egg, wax, even casein. Their palette was more vivid than we ever gave them credit for. So, why didn't it survive? Because classical art wasn't made to last. It wasn't sealed behind glass or climate-controlled. It lived in temples, homes, and tombs exposed to the elements, or worse, to Christianity's rise, which viewed such imagery as pagan idolatry. Churches were built atop sanctuaries. Monasteries became fortresses of censorship. Statues were smashed, paintings scraped away. And once Greek painting disappeared, it vanished from the cultural bloodstream. The Renaissance would relearn what had already been known: perspective, proportion, light, human emotion. The rediscovery was hailed as a revolution, but it was really a resurrection. And what might have survived? There are whispers, underground chambers, sealed tombs, hidden caches in places like Macedonia where royal burials hint at higher artistry. The tomb of Philip II of Macedon, for instance, contained painted friezes showing warriors and horses in motion glimpses of lost genius. Some scholars even believe that buried under layers of fresco and plaster in Pompeii are Greek originals, painted by immigrants or imported from Athens and Corinth. And here's the sting: if we ever find them, we might not recognize them. Because we've trained our eyes on marble and ruin. We think of Greece in white and gray. But the true Hellenic world? It was drenched in color, alive with pigment, alive with narrative. The paintings told stories, epic ones, from the Trojan War to the labors of Heracles, from the lives of philosophers to scenes of everyday love and grief. They weren't just decoration, they were cultural memory. And we lost them. Not to ignorance, but to time, war, fire, faith, neglect. And yet, in every museum, in every shattered amphora or cracked statue, there are ghosts of the paintings that once wrapped them, hints, palimpsests, the outline of a world once as vivid as ours. Next, we turn from culture clubs to political clubs, From the brushstrokes of vanished painters to the etched initials of ancient social organizations. It's time to investigate the scolae of ancient Romith forgotten guilds, cults, and societies that once shaped the city from the ground up. The full collection of the ancient Roman scolae. They were the invisible gears of Roman society, the social scaffolding beneath the marble and myth. You won't find them in your average Latin textbook, and they rarely make the cut in grand histories of Rome. But if you want to understand how the Eternal City truly functioned, how it moved, breathed, worked, and worshipped, you have to understand the scolae. The word scola, plural, scolae, is slippery. In modern Latin, it's often translated as school, but that's misleading. In ancient Rome, a scola could be many things: a meeting place, a guild, a fraternity, a religious brotherhood, a burial club. Some were formal organizations with charters, rules, and treasuries. Others were loose associations of workers or devotees, but they all shared one thing in common. They were communities within the community. Imagine Romana as a uniform empire of togas and aqueducts, but as a dense, cacophonous urban hive. A city of over 1 million people in its prime. Slaves, freedmen, merchants, immigrants, artisans, soldiers, priests. A metropolis of unequal parts, built on hierarchy and network. And at the street level, the scolae. They were how you navigated that world. They gave you protection, identity, a place to belong, a voice in the crowd. There were professional scolae, bakers, carpenters, fullers, shipbuilders, perfumers, candlemakers. Each trade had its own organization, part union, part trade school, part mafia. These guilds regulated standards, trained apprentices, set prices, and protected members. They might maintain a shared workshop, or fund a banquet hall, or build a temple. There were religious scolae, brotherhoods devoted to a god or goddess. Isis, Mithras, Sol Invictus, Cybele. Some were mystery, cult secretive, initiatory, tied to rituals and symbols the public never saw. Others were more civic, sponsoring public feasts and festivals. They took care of shrines, organized processions, kept ancient rites alive. There were military scolae, groups of veterans who had served together, now retired and settled in Roman colonies. These scolae maintained loyalty, offered mutual aid, and preserved regimental identity. Some evolved into elite bodyguard units, like the Scolae Palatinae under Constantinea, precursor to imperial palace guards. And then there were the funerary scolae, arguably the most vital of all. In a city like Rome, dying alone was a fate worse than death. A proper burial wasn't just a cultural expectation, it was a religious necessity. The soul couldn't rest without rites. The poor and marginalized slaves, freedmen, laborers often couldn't afford this on their own. Enter the Collegia Funeratia, burial clubs. Pay your dues, and when your time came, the schola would bury you, with dignity, with ceremony, maybe even with a small monument bearing your name. Some of these funerary scolae evolved into full-on collegia corporate bodies with legal status under Roman law. They could own property, sue and be sued, maintain treasuries, and construct buildings. Many had clubhouse scolae in the architectural sense, where members met, feasted, debated, and worshipped. In Ostia, the port city of Rome, archaeologists have uncovered dozens of such buildings. Decorated with mosaics, inscribed with dedications, they are the physical remains of Roman civil society. One scola for shipwrights, another for grain merchants, another for rope makers. Each had its own symbol, its own patron deity, its own set of rituals. But here's the rub. We don't have a full record. We know of over 1,000 collegia from inscriptions scattered across the empire, but that's just a fraction. Most were never recorded, or their records didn't survive. The great libraries of Rome, the civic archives burned, buried, looted, lost. What we have are tombstones, fragments, plaques in crumbling walls, names half erased. We know that the Scolae could be political, that they sometimes organized protests or backed candidates, that during the Republic they were watched warily by the Senate, especially when their gatherings got too loud, too unified, too powerful. In 64 BCE, a law restricted the right of association, fearing that Collegia were becoming fronts for insurrection. But under the empire, they flourished again. Augustus, always a master of soft power, co-opted the Collegia as tools of social control. Give people local identity, let them feel included, and they won't revolt. And in the late empire, the Scolae changed again. As Christianity spread, old religious Scolae faded, but new ones emerged. Church-affiliated associations, guilds of grave diggers, clergy, and charity workers. The structure persisted. The content evolved. In a sense, the Scolae never died. They became the medieval guilds, the confraternities of the Catholic world, the masons, tailors, tanners, scribes. The idea of mutual aid, professional identity, shared worship, that's the DNA of the Scolae, still pulsing in every labor union and fraternity today. And yet, so much remains unknown. How many were there? What were their internal rituals, their bylaws, their initiation oaths? We don't know. The inscriptions tell us names, titles, donations, but rarely details. Somewhere in the ruins of Rome, or buried in unopened archives, or hidden in unexcavated villas, may lie a full record of a forgotten Scola, a roll of members, a list of dues, minutes from a meeting. A fragment of a forgotten society that once lit candles, sang songs, shared bread, and shaped the empire from the inside out. Because Rome was never just emperors and legions, it was people, and those people didn't live alone. They joined, organized, created structures inside the structure. Scolae. We lost most of them, but they're still there in mosaics, in stone, in the silent corners of the Forum. And maybe, just maybe, that's where we'll find them again. And that, at last, brings us to the end of our journey through the strangest absences in human memory. We've wandered lost libraries, sunken palaces, vanished maps, and fragmented scripts. We've chased whispers across continents, stared into skulls, fallen into silent tombs, dug through the soot of burned cities and the silence of erased languages. What remains? Not answers, but questions. And in history, questions are the most valuable artifacts of all.